They taxed his land. They taxed his labor. Then they made the mistake of taxing his patience. Shorty Small. A Western Adventure. Chapter 1. The mule's name was Barnaby, and he had a sense of humor that mostly involved stopping dead when the sun was directly overhead. Shorty Small didn't hold it against him. Barnaby was pulling a single-bottom plow through soil that was more limestone than loam, and the sound of the steel share hitting rock was a constant jarring rhythm, like a hammer striking a bad bell. Clang. Barnaby stopped. He blew air through his nose, shaking his big ears, the leather harness creaking. Shorty wiped his forehead with a sleeve that was already stiff with sweat and red dust. He stepped back from the handles and looked at the ground. A gray crown of rock, jagged and scarred by the plow blade, poked out of the dirt. It looked like the top of a skull, buried shallow. "All right," Shorty said. He didn't shout. He spoke to the mule like he was speaking to a partner in a card game who just played a bad hand. "You made your point." Shorty walked to the edge of the furrow where his crowbar lay in the grass. He picked it up. It was heavy iron, polished smooth by his grip. He walked back, jammed the point under the edge of the rock, and leaned into it. He wasn't a big man, the name fit him well enough, but he was built like a fence post, all gristle and wire. He pushed. His boots slipped in the loose dirt, then caught. The rock groaned, a wet sucking sound as the earth let go and rolled over. It was the size of a wash basin. "Toby," Shorty called out. "Jeb." Two boys came running from the pile of stones at the edge of the clearing. They were barefoot, their trousers held up by suspenders made of twine. They looked like miniature versions of Shorty, just with less weathering. "Got a big one, Pa?" Toby asked. He was 10, the oldest, and took the job of rock management serious. "Big enough for the bottom row," Shorty said. "Get the sled." The boys dragged a wooden sled over the furrows. They grunted, heaving the limestone chunk onto the wood. "Watch your toes," Shorty said. "That rock don't care if it breaks you." "Yes, Pa." They hauled it away, leaning forward into the ropes. Shorty watched them go. He looked at the field. It was 5 acres of hard promises. When he bought the deed, the land agent in the territory office had laughed. He said, "Mr. Small, that land is vertical. You can't farm a cliff." Shorty hadn't argued. He just paid the money he'd saved from 10 years of swamping out saloons and laying brick. He wanted vertical. He wanted high up. He wanted a place where the only thing looking over his shoulder was a hawk. He grabbed the plow handles again. "Hup, Barnaby." The mule leaned into the collar. The earth turned over, dark and rich where the rocks weren't hiding. By noon, the sun was a white weight on the back of his neck. Shorty unhitched the mule and led him to the shade of the big oak tree that marked the property line. He gave Barnaby a bucket of water from the creek, then sat down on a flat stump to wipe his face. He saw Sarah coming up the path from the cabin. She was walking slow, one hand holding her skirts up out of the dust, the other swinging a tin pail. She was a small woman with hair the color of dried wheat, pulled back tight. She didn't smile much when she was working, but her eyes were always soft when they landed on him. She reached the tree and set the pail down. "Thought you might be dry," she said. "Dry as a bone," Shorty said. He took the dipper she handed him. The water was cold, tasting of iron and deep earth. He drank it down in one long pull and wiped his mouth. "Boys working." "They're stacking the wall," Sarah said. She sat on the grass, smoothing her apron. "Little Mary is helping. She's bringing the pebbles. Every bit counts." Sarah looked out over the valley. From up here, the world dropped away. You could see the green tops of the pines rolling out like a rug, turning blue in the distance. There wasn't a roof line in sight. No smokestacks. No roads, just the deer trails and the ruts Shorty's wagon had made coming in. "It's quiet today," Sarah said. "It's quiet every day," Shorty said. He opened the napkin she'd brought. Cornbread and a thick slice of ham. "That's what we bought." "Mrs. Millard, down at the crossing, said she gets lonely sometimes," Sarah said. "Said she misses hearing the piano at the church." "Mrs. Miller likes to talk," Shorty said. He took a bite of the cornbread. It was still warm. "She talks enough to fill the quiet up on her own." Sarah smiled then, a quick flash. "She does go on. But she asked if we heard about the troubles in town. Said there was a shooting at the saloon last Saturday." Shorty chewed slow. He swallowed. "Town business. Drunks and money. Don't concern us." She said the sheriff was asking about folks up on the ridge. Wondering who was squatted where. "We ain't squatting," Shorty said. He brushed crumbs off his lap. "I got the paper in the tin box under the bed. Signed and stamped. This is small land." "I know," Sarah said. She looked at his hands, scarred and stained with soil. "I just worry. We're far out, Shorty. If trouble comes." "Trouble don't climb hills if it don't have to," Shorty said. "Trouble likes the flat road where the whiskey flows easy. Up here, it's just work. Trouble is lazy." He stood up. He offered a hand to Sarah and pulled her to her feet. Her hand felt small and rough in his. "We keep our heads down," Shorty said. "We pull the rocks out. We plant the corn. We mind our own. The world will forget we're up here. That's the plan." "It's a good plan," Sarah said. She picked up the pail. "Supper at sundown. Don't work Barnaby to death." "He'd quit long before he died," Shorty said. He watched her walk back toward the cabin, the smoke from the chimney rising straight up in the still air. It was a good picture. It was the only picture he wanted to look at. He went back to the mule. Barnaby was asleep, his lower lip drooping. "Wake up," Shorty said, slapping the mule's flank. "We got 3 more rows before the light goes." The afternoon wore on. The pile of rocks grew higher. The boys kept hauling, their faces streaked with dirt, turning it into a game of who could carry the heaviest stone without dropping it. Shorty didn't stop them. He let them find the fun in the labor. That was how you made a farmer. You didn't teach him to love the dirt. You taught him to beat the rock. The sun dipped behind the western ridge, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and orange. The air cooled off fast, the heat lifting out of the valley floor. Shorty unhitched the plow. He walked Barnaby down to the small barn he'd built the first month they arrived. He brushed the mule down, checking his hooves. He pitched hay into the manger and checked the chickens. Toby and Jeb were washing up at the pump, splashing water at each other. Mary, who was 6, was sitting on the porch steps, holding a black and white cat that tolerated her grip with feline resignation. Shorty walked into the cabin. It was one room, divided by curtains for sleeping. The fireplace took up one wall, built from the very stones Shorty had pulled from the field. It was solid, permanent. The smell of stew was heavy in the air, potatoes, onions, and a little salt pork. It smelled like rich living to a man who had grown up eating hardtack and beans. Shorty hung his hat on the peg by the door. He walked to the basin and scrubbed his face and hands with lye soap. He watched the dirt swirl down the drain. "Sit," Sarah said. "It's ready." They sat at the table Shorty had made from pine planks. The wood was plain smooth but unvarnished. Shorty said grace. He didn't ask for much, just thanked the Lord for the food and the roof. He kept his prayers like his conversation, short and to the point. They ate. The boys talked about a snake they'd seen near the creek. "Black snake?" Shorty asked. "Yes, sir," Jeb said. Big one. Leave him be. He eats the mice. I threw a rock at him, Jeb admitted. Shorty looked at his son over the rim of his coffee cup. Don't throw rocks at things that do work for you. Snake minds his business, you mind yours. Yes, Pa. After supper, Sarah cleared the plates. Shorty moved to the rocking chair by the fire. He packed a pipe with tobacco he'd grown himself. It was rough cut and burned hot, but it settled the stomach. He leaned his head back, listening to the fire crackle. The wind was picking up outside, whistling around the eaves. It was a lonely sound, but tonight it felt protective. It was a wall of air between them and the rest of the territory. His eyes drifted up to the mantel. Resting on 2 deer antler hooks was a double-barreled shotgun. It was an older model, with external hammers that curled back like scorpion tails. The wood of the stock was dark walnut, oiled until it gleamed. The steel barrels were blue-black, clean of rust. It wasn't a decorative piece. It was a tool, same as the plow or the crowbar. Sarah sat on the rug, mending a shirt. She saw him looking at the gun. You expecting that coyote back? She asked. Shorty took the pipe out of his mouth. Heard him yipping last night. Down by the lower coop. He didn't get in, Sarah said. Chicken wire held. Wire holds until it don't, Shorty said. I checked the load this morning. Double-aught buck in the right, bird shot in the left. That seems like a lot for a coyote. Varmints come in all sizes, Shorty said. Some are skunks. Some are wolves. Gun don't care which is which. He stood up and walked to the mantel. He ran a finger along the barrel. No dust. He kept it clean. A dirty gun was a dangerous thing, or a useless one, and Shorty had no use for either. He remembered what the land agent had said about the law out here. Sheriff Boggs handles the town, Mr. Small. Out in the hills. You're the sheriff, the judge, and the jury. Shorty didn't want to be a judge. He just wanted to be a farmer. But he kept the shotgun loaded because he understood the basic rule of the high country: you keep what you can hold. Leave it be, Shorty, Sarah said softly. Come sit. You've been staring at that iron for 5 minutes. Shorty looked at the gun one last time, then turned back to the room. The firelight was warm on the faces of his children. Toby was carving a stick. Mary was asleep on the pallet. This was it. This was the whole world. 5 acres of rocks, a mule with an attitude, and a cabin full of people who looked at him like he hung the moon. You're right, Shorty said. He sat back down in the rocker. Just checking. We're fine, Sarah said. Nobody knows we're here but the birds. That's the way we keep it, Shorty said. He closed his eyes. He could feel the vibration of the day's work in his muscles, a dull ache in his shoulders from the crowbar. It was a good ache. It meant he was building something. Outside the wind howled, rattling the shutter. Shorty didn't flinch. He just rocked, listening to the fire, believing that if he worked hard enough, the rocks would run out before his back did, and the world would stay down in the valley where it belonged. Chapter 2. The afternoon was hot enough to curl the shingles on the roof. It was a Tuesday, 3 days after Shorty had wrestled the limestone skull out of the lower field. The air hung heavy and still, smelling of pine resin and dry grass. Shorty was in the lean-to behind the barn, sharpening a scythe. The rhythmic shish-shish of the whetstone against the steel blade was the only sound in the world, except for the lazy buzzing of a mud dauber building a nest in the rafters. He checked the edge with his thumb. It grabbed the skin, sharp enough to shave the hair off a gnat. That'll cut, Shorty said to the empty air. He set the stone down on the workbench and wiped his hands on a rag. He was thinking about the hay in the upper meadow. It was tall, yellowing at the tips. If the rain held off, he could cut it tomorrow. If the rain came, he'd have rot. That was the gamble. You played poker with the sky every morning, and the house usually held the aces. Then the world ended. It didn't start with a noise. It started with a thump in the soles of his boots, a vibration that traveled up through his shins and rattled his teeth. The ground jumped. A split second later, the sound arrived. Boom. It wasn't thunder. Thunder rolled. Thunder had a deep, baritone growl that started low and built up. This was a crack, sharp and violent, like the earth's spine snapping. It echoed off the canyon walls, slapping back and forth, multiplying itself until the air was solid noise. In the barn, Barnaby the mule screamed. It was a high, terrified sound, followed by the crash of wood splintering as a hoof went through a stall board. The chickens in the yard exploded into a cloud of feathers and frantic clucking, scattering for the brush. Shorty didn't freeze. He didn't look up at the sky. He dropped the scythe and ran for the cabin. He moved fast, his boots pounding the hard-packed dirt. Sarah was on the porch, holding Mary tight against her apron. Her face was pale, eyes wide and fixed on the southern ridge where a plume of gray dust was rising into the blue sky. "Get inside," Shorty barked. He didn't stop moving. He hit the steps, went through the door, and grabbed the shotgun from the mantel. He broke the action, checking the loads he knew were there. 2 brass caps stared back at him. He snapped it shut. Clack. He grabbed a handful of extra shells from the box on the shelf and shoved them into his pocket. "Shorty." Sarah's voice was thin. Was that the powder mill in town?" "Too loud," Shorty said. He walked back out to the porch. Sounded closer. Sounded like it was in the valley. "Is it war?" Toby asked. He was standing by the woodpile, holding an axe he was too small to swing effectively, looking scared but ready. "Ain't no war here, son," Shorty said. "War is loud, but it don't shake the ground like that." He looked at the dust cloud. It was settling, drifting east on the wind. It looked like smoke, but it smelled of pulverized rock and something sharper, sulfur and bitterness. "Stay here," Shorty ordered. "Keep the door barred. Toby, you watch the trail. Anything comes up that ain't me, you holler." "I'm coming with you," Jeb said. He was 8, and he had a stick that he pretended was a rifle. "You stay with your ma," Shorty said. His voice had the flat, hard edge of a command that didn't invite debate. "You watch the back. Go." Jeb slumped, but he moved to the rear window. Shorty stepped off the porch. He didn't take the main path that wound down the hill. That was wide enough for a wagon. If someone was coming up, that's the way they'd come. Shorty took the deer trail, a narrow ribbon of matted leaves and dirt that cut through the thickest part of the scrub oak. He moved quietly. It was a habit born of hunting meat for the table. You didn't snap twigs. You didn't scuff your heels. You placed your foot, rolled your weight, and kept your breathing shallow. The woods were dead silent. The explosion had stunned everything. The birds had stopped singing. The squirrels were hiding. The only sound was Shorty's breathing and the soft brush of denim against bark. He climbed. The terrain was steep, fighting him every step. He used the shotgun as a balance, pushing through tangles of briar that snagged at his clothes. He ignored the scratches. He was focused on the ridge line, 300 yards up. He stopped once to listen. He heard voices. They were faint, carried on the updraft. Men's voices. Shouting. Not in anger, but in work. The casual, heavy shouting of men moving something big. Shorty crouched low. He moved slower now, flitting from tree trunk to tree trunk. He reached the crest of the ridge, where the trees thinned out, and the limestone bones of the mountain poked through the soil. He took off his hat and peered over the edge of a boulder. He looked down into the valley. It wasn't his land down there. It was open range, a long, narrow strip of bottomland with a creek running through it. It had been green yesterday, a place where the deer bedded down and the wild turkeys strutted. Now it was a wound. A scar of raw red earth had been gouged across the valley floor. Trees were down, uprooted and shoved into piles like trash. The creek was muddy, choked with debris. And there were men. Dozens of them. They looked like ants swarming over a dropped piece of candy. They were shirtless, sweating, swinging picks and shovels in a rhythm that looked exhausted and relentless. In the center of the chaos, near a wall of rock that jutted out from the hillside, smoke was still drifting. The rock face was shattered, a pile of rubble at its base. Shorty watched. He saw mule teams dragging heavy timber sleds. He saw a tent city set up on the far bank of the creek. Canvas flaps luffing in the breeze, cook fires smoking. It wasn't a war party. It wasn't bandits. It was something heavier. Iron, Shorty whispered. He saw the tracks. They hadn't reached the blast site yet, but they were coming from the east. Twin lines of steel gleaming in the sun, laid on fresh-cut ties that smelled of creosote even from this distance. Railroad. Shorty felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He tightened his grip on the shotgun. He had heard stories. Men in the saloons, talking about the trans-territory line. They talked about it like it was the second coming. They said it brought money. They said it brought goods from St. Louis in 3 days instead of 3 weeks. They didn't say it did this. They didn't say it tore the skin off the world and left it bleeding. A man on a horse rode along the line of workers. He was wearing a dark suit and a bowler hat, looking ridiculous in the heat. He pointed at the rubble pile. He shouted something, gesturing with a riding crop. The men scrambled, moving faster, lifting rocks that looked heavy enough to crush a spine. Shorty watched the man in the suit. That was the boss. That was the man who gave the order to blow a hole in the quiet. Shorty looked at the shotgun in his hands. It was a good gun. It could stop a bear. It could stop a man. But it couldn't stop this. You couldn't shoot a railroad. You couldn't buckshot progress. He looked back at the blast site. They were clearing the way for a tunnel, or maybe a cut. They were going straight through the hill. His hill. Shorty slid back down behind the boulder. He sat in the dirt, the shotgun across his knees. He had moved here to get away. He had bought the highest, rockiest piece of ground he could find because nobody else wanted it. He thought he was safe. He thought the vertical land was a wall that greed couldn't climb. He was wrong. Greed didn't climb, it blasted. Another vibration shook the ground. Smaller this time. A secondary charge, or maybe just a heavy load dropping. Shorty didn't jump. He just sat there, feeling the tremor move through his own bones. The dread settled on him. It wasn't the sharp fear of a gunfight. It was a heavy, suffocating weight, like being buried alive. The silence of the high country was gone. The isolation was broken. He thought about Sarah down in the cabin, barring the door against a noise she didn't understand. He thought about the boys stacking rocks in the field. They were building a wall. The men down there were building a road. And the road was going to run right over the wall. Shorty stood up. He kept low, keeping the rock between him and the valley floor. He turned and looked back the way he came, back toward the farm. The trees looked different now. They didn't look like shelter. They looked like timber waiting to be cut. The ground didn't look like a farm. It looked like a right of way. They ain't asking, Shorty said softly. They're just taking. He started down the hill. He didn't run. He walked with a heavy, deliberate step. He had to go tell Sarah. He had to tell her that the thunder wasn't a storm. It was a train, and it was coming straight for them. Shorty Small held the shotgun tight, but for the first time in his life, he knew that the load in the chambers wasn't enough. Chapter 3. The descent into the valley was a slide through loose shale and choked brush, Barnaby placing his hooves with the careful, grudging deliberation of a mule that knew he was doing something stupid but had no choice in the matter. Shorty didn't use a saddle. He rode bareback, his legs gripping the mule's barrel, the shotgun resting across his thighs like a balance pole. The noise grew louder with every yard they dropped. It wasn't just the boom of the blasting anymore. It was a cacophony of metal on stone, the shouting of men, the crack of whips, and the heavy rhythmic chuff-chuff of a steam shovel that looked like a black iron dinosaur eating the earth. Shorty rode out of the tree line and onto what used to be the valley floor. It was unrecognizable. The grass was gone, churned into a mire of red mud and crushed rock. The air was thick with coal smoke that tasted like copper pennies on the back of the tongue. He nudged Barnaby forward. The mule flattened his ears, eyeing the steam shovel with deep suspicion, but he moved. Shorty rode past a line of men swinging pickaxes. They were stripped to the waist, skin slick with sweat and grime, muscles roping under the strain. They stopped as he passed, leaning on their handles, staring up at the small man on the mule. They didn't look friendly. They looked like men who had been working too hard for too little, and seeing someone riding felt like an insult. "Looking for the boss," Shorty said to a man with a face like a dried apple. The man didn't speak. He just jerked a thumb toward a large canvas tent set up on a rise near the creek. Shorty nodded his thanks, though he didn't get a nod back. He rode on. The tent was the center of the storm. A table was set up outside, covered in maps held down by rocks. A man was standing there, yelling at a subordinate who was holding a surveyor's transit. The man doing the yelling was big. He wore a dirty duster over a vest that strained at the buttons and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He had a beard that looked like steel wool and hands the size of pot roasts. He was pointing a finger at the map like he was stabbing it. Shorty pulled Barnaby up 10 feet from the table. Afternoon. The big man stopped yelling. He turned slowly. He looked at Barnaby. He looked at Shorty's overalls. He looked at the shotgun. He didn't look impressed. "You lost, Sodbuster?" the man asked. His voice was a gravel slide. "Not lost," Shorty said. "I live up there." He pointed toward the ridge with his chin. "Heard the noise. Figured I'd come see who was tearing up the neighborhood." The man laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a bark. "Neighborhood. There ain't no neighborhood here. Just rocks and ticks." "It's home to some," Shorty said. "Name Small." "Shorty Small." "Kane?" the man said. He didn't offer a hand. "Foreman for the trans-territory line. And you're standing in a construction zone, Small. Unofficial personnel tend to get crushed." "I see that," Shorty said. He looked at the steam shovel again. It was gouging a bite out of the hillside, dumping it into a waiting cart. "You building a road?" "Railroad," Kane corrected. He picked up a cigar from the table, bit the end off, and spat it onto the ground near Barnaby's hoof. "The artery of the nation, connecting the savage West to the civilized East. Steel and steam, bringing the future to the backward." "Progress," Shorty said. The word tasted sour. "That's right," Kane said. He lit the cigar, puffing blue smoke into the air. "Progress. It eats mountains and it spits out gold. You ought to be grateful. Property values go up when the iron horse comes through. My property is vertical, Shorty said. Train can't climb a cliff. We don't climb, Kane said. He walked over to Barnaby, inspecting the mule with a sneer. That's what animals do. We cut. We tunnel. We bridge. We make the world flat. He slapped Barnaby on the shoulder. The mule flinched, shifting his weight. Don't touch the mule, Shorty said. His voice didn't rise, but the temperature around him dropped. Kane looked up, eyes narrowing. He saw the way Shorty's hand was resting near the trigger guard of the shotgun. Touchy, Kane grunted. He stepped back. Look, Small. We got a schedule. The Baron wants this line in St. Louis by Christmas. I don't have time to give tours to locals. The Baron. Silas Thorne, Kane said, saying the name like it was a prayer. The man who owns the steel. The man who owns the territory, pretty much. Does he own my farm? Shorty asked. Kane leaned against the table, crossing his thick arms. He looked up at the ridge, then back at Shorty. The look was pitying, but it was the kind of pity a butcher has for a calf. Let me explain something to you, Kane said. You see that shovel? It moves 3 tons of earth in a scoop. You see those men? There's 200 of them. Behind them is a bank with more money than God. And behind the bank is the U.S. Congress. Kane gestured at Shorty, encompassing the mule, the worn boots, the ancient shotgun. And then there's you, Kane said. 1 man. 1 mule. A few acres of rock that wouldn't feed a goat. It feeds my family, Shorty said. For now, Kane said. But the world is changing, Dirt Kicker. The line is coming through. It needs wood for ties. It needs water for the boilers. It needs space for depots and sidings. My land is deeded, Shorty said. I got the paper. Kane laughed again, smoke leaking from his teeth. Paper? You think paper stops a locomotive? Paper is flammable, Small. History is written by the engine, not the ink. Shorty felt the anger simmering in his gut. It wasn't the hot flash of a fight. It was the slow burn of a man being told he didn't matter. So what does that mean? Shorty asked. For me. It means you're obsolete, Kane said. He turned back to his maps, dismissing Shorty as completely as he would a fly. It means you better learn to like the sound of a whistle, or you better pack up that mule and ride west until you hit the ocean. Because we ain't stopping. Not for a rock, and not for a farmer. Shorty sat on the mule for a long moment. He looked at the devastation in the valley. He looked at Kane's broad, arrogant back. He realized then that the explosion wasn't just noise. It was an invasion. They weren't just building a track. They were erasing a way of life. I ain't moving, Shorty said. Kane didn't turn around. Then get used to the soot, Small. And keep your livestock off the track. The cowcatcher doesn't discriminate. Shorty turned Barnaby around. The mule was happy to go, eager to get away from the monster eating the dirt. They rode back up the slope, away from the smoke and the shouting. But the silence of the woods felt different now. It felt fragile. Shorty knew, with the instinct of a man who watched the weather, that the storm wasn't passing. It was just settling in. And the man in the duster down there wasn't the lightning. He was just the wind. The lightning was coming later. Obsolete, Shorty muttered to the mule's ears. Barnaby flicked an ear back, catching the word. Maybe, Shorty said. He patted the stock of the shotgun. But old things still bite. He rode up the ridge, back to the cabin where Sarah was waiting, back to the rocks that were suddenly the only thing standing between him and the future. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Shorty heard the hoofbeats before he saw the rider. They came from the lower trail, a heavy, rhythmic clop, clop that sounded arrogant even at a distance. A mule walks carefully. A horse owned by the county walks like it owns the stones it steps on. Shorty was by the split-rail fence, replacing a post that had rotted out at the base. He had a post-hole digger in his hands, the handles slick with sweat. He stopped digging. He rested the tool against his shoulder and watched the trail. Sheriff Boggs rode into the clearing. He was a big man, soft around the middle but hard around the eyes. He wore a tan duster that was clean, a white shirt buttoned to the throat, and a badge that caught the sun and threw it back like a signal mirror. He rode a chestnut mare that looked like she ate oats 3 times a day and had her mane brushed by a stable boy. Shorty didn't wave. He just stood there, waiting. Boggs pulled the mare up 10 feet from the fence. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the saddle horn. The leather creaked. "Afternoon, Shorty," Boggs said. He had a voice like molasses pouring over gravel, sweet on top, rough underneath. "Sheriff," Shorty said. "Hot one today," Boggs observed. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief that looked whiter than Shorty's Sunday shirt. "Heat rises, they say. Must be hotter up here than down in town." "It's the same sun," Shorty said. Boggs chuckled. It was a practice sound, something he used when he was kissing babies or shaking hands before an election. "Always the philosopher, ain't you? Practical, man." "I got work, Sheriff," Shorty said. "Unless you came up to help dig this hole." "Just paying a call, Shorty. Checking on the constituents. Making sure everyone is happy with the developments." Boggs gestured vaguely toward the valley floor, where the distant sound of the steam shovel was a constant low thrumming vibration. "I saw the foreman," Shorty said. "He told me about the progress." "Mr. Kane," Boggs nodded. "Good man. Gets things done. The governor is very pleased with the pace." "Very pleased indeed." "I bet he is," Shorty said. "He ain't listening to the dynamite while he eats his supper." "Noise is the sound of money, Shorty," Boggs said. He put his hat back on, adjusting the brim so it shaded his eyes. "Which brings me to the reason for my ride. I got some news. Good news, mostly. Depending on how you look at it." Shorty tightened his grip on the post-hole digger. "I ain't looking for news. I'm looking to fix a fence." "It's about the assessment," Boggs said. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a long, folded envelope. "The territorial tax assessor came through last week. Rode the line with Mr. Thorne. Never saw him." "He didn't need to come up here," Boggs said. He looked at the maps. He looked at the proximity to the rail line. And he did some figuring. Boggs leaned down and held the envelope out. Shorty didn't move to take it. "Take it, Shorty. It's official." Shorty wiped his hand on his overalls and took the paper. He didn't open it. "What is it?" "It's your new tax bill," Boggs said. "Improvement tax." "I didn't improve nothing," Shorty said. "I built a barn 3 years ago. I paid the tax on that." "It ain't about the barn," Boggs said. "It's about the location. See, last week this was just scrubland on a hill, worth about 2 cents an acre. But now it's prime real estate adjacent to a major transportation corridor. The value has skyrocketed, Shorty. You're sitting on a gold mine." "I'm sitting on rocks," Shorty said. "And I don't sell rocks." "Doesn't matter if you sell 'em," Boggs said. "You own 'em. And the territory taxes based on value. Since your land is worth more, you owe more." Shorty opened the envelope. He unfolded the paper. His reading wasn't fast, but he knew numbers. He looked at the figure at the bottom of the page. He stared at it. He blinked, thinking maybe a drop of sweat had blurred the ink. He looked again. The number hadn't changed. "This says $200, Shorty said. "Per annum," Boggs clarified. "Payable quarterly. First installment is due the first of the month." Shorty looked up at the sheriff. $200? "Sheriff, I don't see $200 in 5 years. I trade eggs for flour. I sell a hog now and then for seed money. Where am I supposed to get $50 by the first?" Boggs shrugged. The movement was heavy, indifferent. "That ain't my department, Shorty. I just deliver the notices. But if I was you, I'd look at the opportunities. A man with a farm right next to the train, there's money to be made." "I'm a farmer," Shorty said. "Not a banker." "Then maybe you ain't a farmer no more," Boggs said softly. "Maybe you're just a man living on land he can't afford." Shorty felt the heat rise up his neck. "It wasn't the sun. This is my land. I bought it. I broke my back on it." "And you got the deed," Boggs agreed. "But deeds come with obligations. Taxes run the territory, Shorty. They pay for the roads, the schools, the law." "They pay for your horse," Shorty said. Boggs smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "She's a nice horse, ain't she? Government property. Requires upkeep." "I ain't paying it," Shorty said. He crumpled the paper in his fist. "I didn't ask for the railroad. I told Kane to stay off my dirt. You can't tax a man for something he didn't order." Boggs' face changed. The faux friendliness evaporated, leaving something hard and ugly underneath, like the bedrock under the soil. He shifted in the saddle, his hand dropping casually to rest on the grip of his revolver. It wasn't a draw, but it was a reminder. "Now, Shorty," Boggs said. His voice dropped an octave. "You don't want to talk like that. That sounds like refusal. Refusal is a crime." "It's theft," Shorty said. "You're stealing my place." "It's the law," Boggs snapped. "And I enforce the law. You got until the first. You pay the $50, or I come back with a different piece of paper. A writ of seizure." "Seizure?" "The bank takes the deed," Boggs explained, as if he were teaching a slow child. "They auction it off to pay the back taxes. And guess who buys it? The railroad. They need a depot, Shorty. They'd love to have this flat spot." Shorty looked at the post hole digger. It was heavy iron. He could swing it fast. He could knock the sheriff out of the saddle before Boggs cleared leather. Boggs saw the thought. He didn't flinch. He just tapped his fingers on his gun handle. "Don't do it, Shorty," Boggs said. "You got a wife inside. You got kids. You hit a lawman, you don't just lose the farm. You lose your life. You hang." Shorty let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He loosened his grip on the tool. "That's smart," Boggs said. "Be smart. You're a little man, Shorty. Don't try to fight the big machine. You'll just get chewed up in the gears." "It ain't right," Shorty said. "Progress ain't free," Boggs said. "And it ain't concerned with what's right. It's concerned with what's next." He gathered his reins. The mare tossed her head, eager to run. "The first of the month," Boggs repeated. "Bring it to my office in town. Cash. We don't take chickens." He turned the horse and kicked her into a trot. He rode back down the trail, sitting tall, the dust rising up behind him to coat Shorty's fence. Shorty stood there for a long time. He looked at the crumpled ball of paper in his hand. $200. It might as well have been $1 million. He looked at the cabin. Sarah was in there. The boys were in the field. They thought the danger was the dynamite. They thought the danger was the noise. But the danger was a piece of paper. The danger was a man with a badge and a smile who called robbery taxes. Shorty smoothed the paper out on the top of the fence post. He looked at the numbers again, hoping they had changed. They hadn't. He picked up the post hole digger. He rammed it into the earth, hard. The ground was rocky, stubborn, and his. $50, Shorty whispered to the fence. He didn't know how to get it. He didn't know how to fight a bank or a railroad. But he knew one thing. He wasn't leaving. He looked at the shotgun leaning against the porch railing in the distance. Boggs was right. Fighting the law got you hanged. But letting the law take your home got you starved. There had to be a way. A middle ground. A way to make the machine pay for its own fuel. Shorty pulled the digger out of the hole and slammed it down again. He had work to do. And now, the work wasn't just about rocks. It was about survival. Chapter 5. The water tower stood like a giant, brooding spider on the edge of the right-of-way. It was built of dark cypress staves bound with iron hoops, leaking just enough to keep the ground beneath it turned to a permanent black muck. Shorty Small was 50 yards up the line, hammering a nail into a piece of scrap siding. Whack! 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 The sound was small against the vastness of the valley, swallowed up by the wind and the distant clatter of the work crews further west. Shorty checked the board. It was crooked. He didn't fix it. It wasn't a cabinet. It was a desperate plea for commerce nailed to 2 saplings he'd cut from the creek bank. "Hold the other side, Toby," Shorty said. Toby, standing on a crate to reach, held the other end of the rough pine plank. "What's it supposed to say, Pa?" "It says fresh food," Shorty said. He grabbed the can of black paint and a brush that had seen better decades. "Keep it steady." He painted the letters. They were blocky, dripping slightly. Simple. Sarah was behind them, unloading the mule cart. She moved with a nervous energy, arranging tin pie plates on a table Shorty had cobbled together from fence rails and crate lids. The pies were still warm, smelling of cinnamon and tart apples, a scent that had no business existing down here in the soot and the mud. "You think they'll stop?" Sarah asked. She wiped a smudge of flour from her cheek. She was wearing her best bonnet, the one with the blue ribbon, trying to bring a little dignity to the roadside. "They got to stop," Shorty said. He capped the paint. "Boilers need water. Men need food. It's the only law of nature this railroad seems to respect." He stepped back and looked at the stand. It was pathetic. A lean-to of scavenged wood sitting in the weeds, offering the fruits of his labor to the machine that was trying to strangle him. "It looks welcoming," Sarah lied gently. "It looks like what it is," Shorty said. "A man selling his pride by the slice." He heard the whistle then. It was a mournful, shrieking sound that cut through the valley, echoing off the ridge where his quiet farm used to be. The ground began to tremble. "Here it comes," Shorty said. "Get the boys back, Sarah. Keep 'em behind the cart." The train came around the bend like a dragon with a bellyache. It was a work train, a massive black locomotive pulling flat cars loaded with ties, rails, and men, followed by a couple of passenger cars likely carrying surveyors or brass. It was spewing coal smoke that settled over the stand like a dirty blanket. The brakes squealed, a metal-on-metal scream that made Shorty's teeth ache. The engine hissed, venting steam, and ground to a halt right next to the water tower. The heat coming off the boiler was a physical blow. It smelled of hot oil and fire. Men started jumping off the flat cars. They were the track layers, the Gandhi dancers, men with shoulders like oxen and faces masked in grime. They looked tired, thirsty, and mean. Shorty stood behind his makeshift counter. He crossed his arms. He didn't smile. He wasn't a shopkeeper. He was a rock farmer, and he felt exposed. One of the men, a giant with a sledgehammer still in his hand, walked over. He looked at the sign. He looked at the pies. He sniffed the air. "How much?" the man grunted. "2 bits for a slice," Shorty said. "$1 for the whole tin." The man laughed. It sounded like gravel in a chute. $1? I make $1 a day, little man." "Then you can afford a slice," Shorty said evenly. "Or you can eat the hardtack the company gives you." The man glared at him, then looked at the pie. The crust was golden brown, the juice bubbling up through the vents. His stomach made the decision for him. He fished a quarter out of his pocket and slapped it on the wood. "Apple," he said. Sarah stepped forward. She cut a generous wedge and slid it onto a piece of wax paper. "There you are, sir." The man took it. He shoved half of it into his mouth in one bite. His eyes widened. He chewed, swallowed, and looked at the rest of the slice with something approaching reverence. "Hey," he yelled back to the train. "Real food. It ain't sawdust." That broke the dam. The men swarmed. They came off the cars in a wave. Irishmen, Chinese laborers, freedmen, locals, hired on for the labor. They crowded the stand, jostling, shouting orders. Shorty didn't have time to feel humiliated anymore. He was too busy taking money. One at a time. Shorty barked. "Get back. You push the lady, you don't eat." They listened. Shorty had a voice that cut through noise, honed by calling hogs and mules in a windstorm. They formed a ragged line. Quarters and dimes clinked into the cigar box Shorty had nailed to the table. Sarah cut pies until her wrists ached. Toby and Jeb handed out hard-boiled eggs and bunches of onions. It was chaotic, loud, and dirty. Then the passengers came. They stepped down from the rear car while the engine took on water. These weren't laborers. These were men in suits, women in traveling dusters, people with soft hands and hard expressions. A man in a checkered vest walked up to the edge of the crowd. He wrinkled his nose at the laborers, then looked at Shorty. "Do you have anything cleaner?" the man asked. He looked at the eggs like they might bite him. "Shell's clean," Shorty said. "Inside's clean. Dirt's on the outside. Same as people." The laborers laughed. The man in the vest flushed. "I'll take a cider," the man said, pointing to a jug. "If the cup is washed." "Cup's a penny extra," Shorty said. "Or you can drink from the jug like a man." The man sneered, threw a nickel on the table, and took the cup Sarah offered. He drank it, wiped his mouth with a silk handkerchief, and walked away without a word. "Thank you," Sarah called after him, because she was raised right even if the man wasn't. The whistle blew again. 3 short blasts. "Bored?" the conductor shouted. The swarm receded as quickly as it had arrived. Men grabbed the last of the eggs, tossed coins, and ran for the moving flat cars. The man in the vest stepped gingerly back onto the passenger car. The train hissed, jerked, and began to roll. The noise built up again, a rhythmic chugging that shook the ground. And then it was gone. The silence rushed back into the valley, leaving ringing ears in its wake. Shorty stood by the table. The pies were gone. The eggs were gone. The onions were gone. The table was covered in crumbs and dust. He looked at the cigar box. It was heavy. Sarah slumped against the wheel of the mule cart. She looked exhausted. Her bonnet was askew, her apron stained with fruit juice and soot. "We sold out," she said. She sounded amazed. "We did," Shorty said. He picked up the box. He didn't open it to count it yet. He could tell by the weight. There was maybe $20 in there. It was good money. Fast money. More money in 20 minutes than he made in a month of turning rocks. But he felt hollow. He looked at his hands. They were covered in coal dust from the coins he'd taken. He rubbed them on his overalls, but the gray stain didn't come off. "Shorty," Sarah asked, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," Shorty said. He looked at the empty track, the steel rails shining in the sun. "Just thinking." "About the tax." "About the cost," Shorty said. He picked up the empty crates and loaded them back into the cart. He dismantled the table, stacking the wood. He wanted to leave the sign, but he decided against it. If he left it, it might get stolen, or worse, laughed at by the empty air. "Let's go home," Shorty said. "Barnaby hates the smell of this place." He helped Sarah up onto the seat of the cart. He lifted the boys in. He took the reins. As they rode back up the trail, away from the water tower, Shorty kept one hand on the cigar box. He was a merchant now. A roadside peddler. He was feeding the men who were tearing up his valley, taking their money so he could give it to the sheriff who was threatening his home. It was a circle. A tight, choking circle. He looked back once at the water tower. It was just a dark shape against the sky. "Next time," Shorty said to the mule's twitching ears, "we bring more pies. And maybe we charge the suits a dime for the cup." Chapter 6. The cigar box was heavy enough to use as a doorstop. Shorty sat on the tailgate of the mule cart, the wood rough against his legs, and counted the take. It was a pile of dirty commerce, nickels stained with tobacco juice, quarters dull with coal dust, and paper dollars soft as felt from being carried in sweaty pockets. $52.40, Shorty said. Sarah stood by the wheel, wiping a pie tin with a rag. She stopped rubbing. "We made it." "We made the tax," Shorty corrected. "Plus $2.40 for flour and sugar." He scooped the money back into the box. It was the first of the month. The deadline. He closed the lid and snapped the little brass latch. It sounded like a jail cell locking. "He's coming," Toby said from his perch on the rail fence. Shorty stood up. He looked down the road. Sheriff Boggs was riding up the track, the chestnut mare stepping high over the ruts. He wasn't alone. He had a deputy with him this time, a thin man with a shotgun resting across his saddle pommel, who looked like he'd steal the pennies off a dead man's eyes. Shorty walked out to the edge of the road. He held the cigar box in both hands. Boggs pulled up. He looked fresh, shaved, and smelled of bay rum. He looked at the stand, the lean-to, the sign, the trampled grass where the railroad men had lined up an hour ago. "Afternoon, Shorty," Boggs said. He didn't get down. "First of the month." "I know the date," Shorty said. He opened the box. He counted out $50 in a stack of small bills and heavy coins. He held it up. Assessment paid in full. Boggs nodded to the deputy. The thin man rode forward, took the money, and stuffed it into a canvas saddlebag without counting it. "Prompt," Boggs said. "I like that. Shows respect for civic duty." "It shows I want to keep my roof," Shorty said. "We done?" Boggs didn't answer right away. He looked past Shorty at the stand. He looked at the empty crates, the crumbs on the counter, the sign that said fresh food in dripping black paint. "You've been busy," Boggs said. "Selling excess," Shorty said. "Farm produce. Same as taking it to the general store." "Is it?" Boggs leaned forward, the leather of his saddle creaking. "General store pays taxes, Shorty. They got a license hanging on the wall. Signed by the county clerk." Shorty felt the muscles in his neck tighten. "I'm selling pies and eggs on the side of the road. I ain't running a mercantile." You're engaging in commerce, Boggs said. He said the word like it was a disease. Public commerce on a right-of-way adjacent to a federally regulated transportation corridor. I'm on my land, Shorty said. My deed goes to the creek. But the customers ain't on your land, Boggs countered smoothly. They step off the train. That makes it interstate business. That falls under the Commerce Regulation Act of, well, the current year. You making this up as you go? Shorty asked. The deputy shifted his shotgun. Boggs held up a hand. I don't make the laws, Shorty. I just enforce them. And the law says you can't run a business without a license. That's anarchy. That's in regulated trade. How much? Shorty asked. He didn't have the energy to argue philosophy with a thief. Business license fee is $20, Boggs said. Retroactive to the start of operations. And then there's the monthly surcharge. 10% of the gross. Shorty looked at the cigar box. He had $2.40 left. I don't have $20, Shorty said. I just gave you everything I made to pay the improvement tax. That's a pickle, Boggs said. He took off his hat and fanned himself. See, if you don't pay the license fee, I have to shut you down. Confiscate the inventory. Maybe levy a fine for operating illegal. You take the money. I can't buy flour, Shorty said. I can't make pies. I can't pay the tax next quarter. Economics is a hard teacher, Boggs agreed. Tell you what. Since you're a good citizen, paid on time and all, I'll let you run on credit. For a week. Credit. I'll note the debt, Boggs said. $20 plus interest. You have it for me next Tuesday when the pay train comes through. And don't forget the 10% for the county. The county, Shorty said. Or your pocket. Boggs' eyes went flat. Careful, Shorty. Insolence is another fine. He gathered his reins. Next Tuesday. Have it ready. Or we board up this little lemonade stand, and I take the mule as collateral. He turned the mare. The deputy followed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto Shorty's sign as he passed. Shorty stood in the dust. The cigar box felt light now. Useless. Sarah walked up beside him. She watched the lawman ride away, disappearing around the bend toward town. He took it all, she asked. He took it, Shorty said. And he put a mortgage on the sweat. We haven't even bled yet. $20. And a cut, Shorty said. 10%. He looked at the stand. He had built it to save the farm. Now the farm was working to pay for the stand, and the stand was working to pay the sheriff. The snake was eating its own tail, and Shorty was the one getting swallowed. We can't make $20 in a week, Sarah said softly. Not with just pies. No, Shorty said. We can't. He closed the cigar box. He looked at the railroad tracks, gleaming like knives in the sun. He looked at the hole in the valley, where the steam shovel was still eating his mountain. Goalposts moved, Shorty said. I kicked the ball through, and he moved the posts. What do we do? Shorty turned and looked up the hill, toward the ridgeline where the rock bridge spanned the chasm. The sun was hitting it, turning the stone to gold. We need a bigger draw, Shorty said. Pies ain't enough. We need something they can't eat. Like what? Like a show, Shorty said. City folk pay for a show. They pay to see things they ain't got at home. He walked over to the sign. He wiped the tobacco spit off with his sleeve. We keep the stand, Shorty said. But we ain't just selling food no more. We're selling the view. And if Boggs wants a cut of the view, he's gonna have to climb the hill to get it. He tossed the box into the cart. Get the boys, Shorty said. We got painting to do. Chapter 7. The private car, at the end of the trans-territory work train, didn't move like the rest of the line. The flat cars up front bucked and groaned over the uneven track, jarring the teeth of the laborers sitting on the ties. But the starlight, as it was stenciled in gold leaf on the mahogany siding, floated. It sat on custom-tuned trucks with double springs, gliding over the rough iron like a skater on fresh ice. Inside, the air didn't smell of coal smoke or unwashed bodies. It smelled of Cuban tobacco, beeswax polish, and the heavy sweet scent of French cognac. Silas Martin sat in a wingback chair, upholstered in crushed red velvet. He was a man composed of sharp angles, a beak of a nose, a pointed chin, and eyes that looked like chips of anthracite coal. He held a crystal snifter in a hand that had never held a shovel, swirling the amber liquid with a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. Across from him, Congressman Thaddeus Leach was trying to light a cigar while the train took a curve. Leach was the opposite of Martin, round, soft, and sweating slightly in a suit that cost more than Shorty Small's farm. "Steady, Thaddeus," Martin said. His voice was dry, lacking any warmth. "You'll scorch the wrapper." Leach got the flame to catch, puffing cheeks that were veined with red. "It's this infernal track, Silas. It's primitive. A man can't enjoy a smoke without fearing for his dental work." "It's under construction," Martin said. "Civilization is a messy business until the final coat of paint goes on." Leach exhaled a blue cloud. "Civilization. Is that what we're calling it?" "We call it whatever gets the appropriation bill signed," Martin said. He took a sip of the cognac. "How is the climate in Washington?" "Expensive," Leach grunted. "The Committee on Interior Affairs is hungry. They want assurances. They want to know the right-of-way is secure before they authorize the next round of subsidies." "The right-of-way is inevitable," Martin said. "I have men moving mountains. Literally." "Mountains are easy," Leach said. "It's the voters I worry about. The squatters. The dirt farmers with their grandfathers' muskets." Martin smiled. It was a thin, bloodless expression. "Voters are like sheep, Thaddeus. You shear them in the spring, and they thank you for cooling them off. As for the squatters, they have their price. Or their breaking point." There was a knock at the heavy oak door at the end of the car. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a heavy thud, the sound of a fist used to hitting things harder than wood. "Enter," Martin said, not looking up from his glass. The door opened. Sheriff Boggs stepped in. The sheriff looked out of place in the starlight. He was dusted with the red clay of the valley, his boots scuffed, his uniform sweat-stained at the armpits. He took off his hat, revealing hair plastered to his skull. He held a canvas sack in his left hand, the same sack his deputy had stuffed Shorty Small's $50 into an hour ago. Boggs hesitated on the plush Persian rug. He looked at his boots, then at the rug, realizing he was tracking mud onto something that probably cost a year's salary. "Mr. Martin," Boggs said. "Congressman." "Sheriff," Martin said. He didn't offer a seat. "You look like you've been rolling in the dirt." "Been riding the collection route, sir," Boggs said. He walked forward, stepping carefully, and placed the heavy sack on the low table between the two men. It landed with a solid thump and a clink of metal. Martin looked at the sack with mild distaste. It was dirty. "Is this the harvest?" "It's the first of the month," Boggs said. "Improvement tax. Plus a few licensing fees I instituted." "Licensing fees," Leach chuckled. "That's creative, Sheriff. What are we licensing?" "The breathing of air." "Commerce," Boggs said, standing at attention. "Caught a farmer selling pies on the right-of-way. Told him he needed a permit." Martin leaned forward and undid the drawstring of the sack. He peered inside. Wads of crumpled bills, silver dollars, quarters. It was the life savings of 20 families, the sweat of 100 brows reduced to a pile of dirty currency. How much? Martin asked. 1,200, give or take, Boggs said. The new assessment is squeezing them hard. Some of them are screaming. Let them scream, Martin said. He didn't touch the money. He just closed the bag. Screaming takes energy. Starving takes resolve. Eventually, they'll realize it's easier to sell the deed than pay the tax. Some of them are stubborn, Boggs noted. That fellow Small. The one with the pies. He paid up. Emptied his pockets, but he paid. Small, Martin repeated. The vertical farm. The one by the tunnel cut. That's him. He's got a mule and a shotgun and a bad attitude. Attitude is expensive, Martin said. Did you adjust his overhead? I put him on a weekly schedule, Boggs said, a hint of pride in his voice. Business license. $20 a week. Plus 10% for the county. Leach laughed out loud, choking on his cigar smoke. $20 a week. For selling pies? Good God, man, that's robbery. It's revenue, Martin corrected. And it's motivation. He picked up the cognac bottle and poured a splash into a third glass. He didn't hand it to Boggs. He pushed it to the edge of the table. Drink, Sheriff. You've earned it. Boggs took the glass. His hand was large and rough against the delicate crystal. He downed it in one gulp, wincing at the burn. It was too good for him, and he knew it. This money, Leach said, pointing his cigar at the sack. We need to be clear on the accounting. The territorial governor will expect his cut for signing the tax bill. The governor will get his envelope, Martin said dismissively. The rest goes to the re-election fund. My fund? Leach asked, raising an eyebrow. Our fund, Martin said. You need to stay in Washington, Thaddeus. You need to keep the subsidies flowing. And I need to make sure the Interior Committee doesn't look too closely at how we acquire our land titles. Boggs blinked. He looked from Martin to Leach. I told him it was for a jail. Told him the county needed a new lockup. Martin looked at the sheriff with amusement. That was very quick thinking, Sheriff. A jail. Yes. The peasants love law and order, don't they? They'll pay their last dime to make sure the criminal element is kept at bay. Even when they are the criminal element, Leach added. Especially then. Martin reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a gold money clip. He peeled off 2 $10 bills and tossed them onto the table next to the sack. For your trouble, Sheriff, Martin said. Buy your wife a hat. Or buy yourself a cleaner shirt. Boggs looked at the $20. It was the exact amount he had demanded from Shorty Small for the license fee. A week's worth of panic for the farmer, a tip for the sheriff. Boggs picked up the bills. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Keep the pressure on, Martin said. We need the valley cleared by winter. The depot is going in at the tunnel mouth. I don't want shanties ruining the view for the investors when they come out for the ribbon cutting. What about Small? Boggs asked. He says he ain't moving. Everyone moves eventually, Martin said. Either vertically or horizontally. If he can't pay the tax, we take the land. If he resists the eviction. Martin shrugged. That's why you carry a gun, isn't it? Boggs touched the grip of his revolver. Yes, sir. Then use your judgment. But get it done. No martyrs. Just failures. We want them to look like failures who couldn't hack the modern world. Yes, sir. You're dismissed. Boggs put his hat back on. He looked at the sack of money one last time, the money he had threatened, bullied, and lied to collect. He looked at the two men, drinking brandy that cost more than a mule. "Good day, gentlemen," Boggs said. He turned and walked out. The heavy door closed with a click, shutting out the noise of the train wheels. Leach watched the door close. "He's a brute." "He's a tool," Martin said. "A blunt instrument. You don't use a scalpel to clear a forest, Thaddeus. You use an axe." Martin picked up the sack. He weighed it in his hand. 1,200, Martin mused. It won't even pay for the champagne at the grand opening. But it's the principle. It's the extraction. He tossed the sack onto the velvet seat next to him. "They think they're paying for roads," Martin said, staring out the window at the passing blur of rock and scrub. "They think they're paying for schools and jails. They have no idea they're paying for their own extinction." Leach swirled his glass. "It does seem a bit harsh. Driving them off land they settled." "They didn't settle it," Martin said cold. "They scratched it. They camped on it. They are placeholders, Thaddeus. Like the buffalo. They served a purpose, keeping the grass down until the real owners arrived." The train whistle blew, a long, lonely sound that vibrated through the floorboards. "The real owners," Leach repeated. "To the real owners." They clinked glasses. The crystal rang with a pure, clear note. Outside, the sun was setting over the ridges, casting long shadows over the broken earth. The train rattled on, a snake of iron and fire eating its way through the wilderness, digesting the sweat of men like Shorty Small, and turning it into smoke and ash. Martin lit a cigar of his own. He watched the smoke curl up toward the gold-leaf ceiling. "Next stop, the future," Martin said. "And God help anyone standing on the tracks," Leach added. "God has nothing to do with it," Martin said. "It's just physics. Mass times acceleration. The little man doesn't stand a chance." Chapter 8. The frost didn't creep up the mountain. It slammed into it. One morning the ground was soft mud. The next it was iron, ringing hard under the heel of a boot. The wind changed direction, dropping down from the north with a bite that went straight through wool and settled in the marrow. Shorty Small stood by the woodpile, axe in hand. He wasn't chopping. He was looking at the stack. It was low, lower than it had been in 5 years. "It ain't enough," he said. He swung the axe, burying the head in a rounds of oak. The wood split with a sharp crack, the sound swallowed instantly by the vast cold silence of the ridge. He picked up the halves and tossed them onto the sled. Barnaby the mule watched him from the fence line, his breath steaming in the gray air. The mule looked thinner. They all looked thinner. Sarah came out on the porch. She was wrapped in a shawl that had been darned so many times it was more thread than fabric. She held a tin cup. "Coffee," she said. "Grounds are twice used, but it's hot." Shorty walked over and took the cup. He wrapped his hands around it, letting the heat seep into his calloused palms. He took a sip. It was weak, tasting like brown water and wishful thinking. "Boggs came by while you were in the lower field," Sarah said. She didn't look at him. She looked at the tree line. "I saw the tracks," Shorty said. "What did he want?" "It ain't Tuesday." "He said the county voted on a supplemental levy for snow removal on the access road." Shorty laughed. It was a dry sound, like leaves skittering on stone. "Snow removal. They don't plow this road. They don't even grade it. We dig ourselves out." He said, "It's a county-wide ordinance. Said we owe another $12 by Friday." "We don't have $12, Shorty said. He drained the cup and handed it back. "We don't have 12 cents. The license fee took the egg money. The surcharge took the pie money. We're stripped, Sarah." he said. Sarah hesitated. She pulled the shawl tighter. He said if we can't pay cash, he'd take the mule. Shorty looked at Barnaby. The mule was the engine of the farm. Without the mule, they couldn't plow. They couldn't haul wood. They couldn't survive. Taking the mule was a death sentence, executed slowly over a freezing winter. He ain't taking the mule, Shorty said. His voice was flat. He takes the mule, he takes the plow. He takes the plow, we starve. I'll shoot the animal before I let Boggs ride him back to town. Shorty, Sarah warned softly. I mean it. He turned away from the porch. He couldn't look at her. The shame of it was a heavy stone in his gut. He had worked this land. He had bled into it. And now, a man with a badge and a smile was peeling it away from him layer by layer. I'm going for a walk, Shorty said. Take the gun, Sarah said. Bear was scratching at the stump yesterday. Shorty grabbed the shotgun from where it leaned against the rail. He didn't check the load. He knew it was full. He walked past the woodpile, past the barn, and headed up the deer trail toward the high ridge. He walked for an hour. The cold air burned his lungs. He walked until his legs ached, trying to outpace the desperation that was nipping at his heels. He reached the highest point of his property, a limestone bluff that overlooked the deep chasm cutting through the mountains. He stopped. This was his favorite spot. It was useless for farming, just rock and drop off, but it was quiet. The railroad noise didn't reach up here. The steam shovel was just a toy in the distance. He sat down on a flat slab of rock. He rested the shotgun across his knees and looked down. The chasm was 100 feet deep, a jagged tear in the earth. At the bottom, a creek rushed over boulders, white water churning. But the real marvel was to his left. A natural arch of stone spanned the gap. It was 50 feet long, a bridge carved by wind and water over 1,000,000 years. It was solid limestone, wide enough for a wagon, arching gracefully over the void. Shorty had walked across it 100 times. The boys played on it, daring each other to look over the edge. To Shorty, it was just part of the land. It was the stone bridge. It was a shortcut to the berry patch on the other side. He stared at it now. The winter sun hit the pale stone, making it glow against the dark pines. It was beautiful, in a rugged, dangerous way. He thought about the people on the train. The man in the vest, who wanted a clean cup. The women in their dusters looking out the windows at the Wild West. Kane had called them the civilized East. He said they wanted to see the savage territory from a safe distance. Shorty rubbed his chin. The stubble rasped against his palm. They bought pies because they were hungry. But they looked. They stared at the mountains like they were seeing magic. They pointed at the hawks. They pointed at the mule. City folk didn't have mountains. They didn't have stone bridges hanging in the sky. They'd pay, Shorty whispered. The idea hit him like a physical blow. It was absurd. It was desperate. But it held water. He stood up and walked to the edge of the bridge. He looked at the span. It was unique. He'd never seen another one like it in the territory. It was a sight. An attraction, Shorty said, testing the word. It felt fancy in his mouth. If he cleared the brush, if he widened the trail from the road, he could bring them up here. Not the workers. The workers didn't care about scenery. The passengers. The ones with the nickels and the curiosity. He paced the length of the bridge. Put a rail here, he muttered, pointing to the drop-off. Safety. City folk get dizzy. He walked back to the solid ground. Clearing here. Picnic tables. Sarah could sell cider. Maybe sandwiches. He looked at the view. It was $1 million view. You could see 3 counties from here. You could see the train winding through the valley like a black snake. He did the math in his head. If 10 people came up a day, 10 cents a head, that was $1. $1 a day kept the mule. It was a hustle. It was selling nothing but rock and air. But Boggs was selling nothing but protection and licenses. If the world was going to be a hustle, Shorty figured he might as well be the one holding the cards. He looked at the sun. It was dropping. The temperature was plunging with it. He needed lumber for tables. He needed paint for a sign. He needed to cut a road that a carriage could navigate without breaking an axle. It was work. Hard work. But it was work with a payoff that Boggs couldn't easily tax. How do you tax a rock? How do you tax a view? Shorty shouldered the shotgun. The heaviness in his chest lifted just a fraction. It wasn't a solution. It was a gamble. But a gamble was better than a surrender. He turned and started back down the trail. He walked faster now, energized. He reached the cabin as the sun touched the horizon. Sarah was lighting the lantern in the window. Shorty stomped the mud off his boots on the porch and opened the door. The heat from the fireplace rushed to meet him. Sarah looked up from the table where she was mending a sock. She saw his face. She saw the set of his jaw. "You shoot the bear?" she asked. "No," Shorty said. He hung the shotgun on the mantel. "Bear's safe." He walked to the table and sat down. He put his hands flat on the wood. "We ain't losing the mule," Shorty said. "How?" Sarah asked. "Shorty, we got 3 days." "We got rocks," Shorty said. "We got a whole mountain of rocks." "Rocks don't pay the sheriff." "These rocks will," Shorty said. "The bridge. The stone bridge up on the high ridge." Sarah looked confused. "The crossing? What about it?" "It ain't a crossing no more," Shorty said. "It's the natural wonder of the Ozarks. It's a destination." He leaned forward, his eyes bright in the firelight. "We're going to clean it up. We're going to put up a rail. We're going to build tables. And we're going to put a sign down by the water tower." "A sign?" "See the natural bridge. 10 cents. Sarah stared at him. She put the sock down. "Shorty, people ain't going to pay a dime to look at a rock. They pay a nickel to drink cider out of a clean cup," Shorty said. "They pay to see the elephant at the fair. They'll pay. They're bored, Sarah. They sit on that train for 3 days looking at nothing. We give them something to look at. We give them a story." "But the winter. It's cold." "Snow on the bridge makes it pretty," Shorty said. "We sell hot coffee. We sell the view." He stood up and paced the small room. "I need the saw," he said. "And the sledge. Toby and Jeb can help with the brush. We start at first light." "Shorty," Sarah said. She stood up and walked to him. She put her hand on his arm. Are you sure?" Shorty looked at her. He looked at the fear in her eyes, the fear of the cold, of the hunger, of the man in the duster coming to take everything they had built. "I ain't sure of nothing," Shorty said. "Except that I ain't giving up. I ain't letting Boggs win. He wants commerce? I'll give him commerce. I'll sell the whole damn mountain if I have to, one look at a time." Sarah held his gaze. She saw the desperation, but she also saw the spark. The refusal to break. 10 cents, she asked. 10 cents, Shorty confirmed. "Kids for a nickel." Sarah smiled then. It was a tired smile, but it was there. I guess I better put the coffee pot on. If we're selling the view, they're going to want something to warm their hands." Shorty nodded. He looked at the shotgun on the wall. "We ain't just farmers no more, Sarah," Shorty said. "We're in the tourism business." He went to the window and looked out at the dark shape of the barn. Barnaby was in there, chewing his hay. "Sleep well, mule," Shorty whispered. "You got a job to do tomorrow. We're building a road to the sky." The wind rattled the door, trying to get in, trying to freeze them out. Shorty ignored it. He had a plan. It was a crazy, rocky, desperate plan. But it was all he had. Chapter 9. The sign was a monstrosity of scrap lumber and desperation, but it was legible. Toby had done the lettering with a brush made of hog bristle, dipping it into a bucket of whitewash, mixed with a little lampblack to give it edge. "See the wonder of the West. Natural rock bridge. 10 cents. Shorty hammered the stake into the semi-frozen earth near the water tower. The ground fought back, ringing like a bell with every strike of the sledge, but Shorty didn't stop until the wood was buried deep enough to stand against a gale. He stepped back, wiping his nose with a gloved hand. The wind was whipping down the valley, cutting through his coat, but he didn't feel the cold. He felt the nervous hum of a man placing a bet he couldn't afford to lose. "You think they'll read it, Pa?" Toby asked. He was shivering, his breath puffing out in white clouds. "If they can read, they'll read it," Shorty said. "If they can't, the arrow points up the hill. Curiosity does the rest." Shorty looked up the slope. They had spent 3 days hacking a switchback trail through the scrub oak. It wasn't a boulevard, but it was wide enough for a lady in a bustle to walk 2 abreast without snagging her skirts on a briar. At the top, just visible against the gray sky, was the limestone arch. "Here it comes," Shorty said. The vibration started in the soles of his boots before the sound reached his ears. The 10:15 from St. Louis. It was the passenger special, the one with the glass windows and the velvet seats, carrying folks who thought the frontier was a show put on for their amusement. The train rounded the bend, a black iron beast spewing smoke that flattened against the valley floor. It squealed to a halt at the tower, the brakes throwing sparks. Shorty stood by the sign. He didn't shout this time. He didn't hawk his wares like a carnival barker. He just stood there, leaning on a walking stick, looking like he knew a secret. The doors opened. The conductor stepped down, placing a yellow stool on the gravel. "Water stop," the conductor yelled. 20 minutes. "Stretch your legs, folks, but don't wander off." A man in a bowler hat stepped down. He looked at the barren valley, the mud, the steam hissing from the engine. He looked bored. Then he saw the sign. He squinted. He adjusted his spectacles. "Natural rock bridge," he said aloud. "Wonder of the West." Shorty stepped forward. "Finest view in the territory," he said. "Walk takes 5 minutes. Air is cleaner up there." The man looked at the hill. He looked at the train. He looked at his pocket watch. "Is it safe?" the man asked. "Stone's been there 1,000,000 years," Shorty said. "Ain't fell yet." The man dug into his vest pocket. He pulled out a dime. "Why not? I've been sitting on this train for 2 days. My knees are locking up." He handed the dime to Shorty. "Path starts there," Shorty pointed. "Boy will guide you." Toby straightened up, looking official. "Right this way, sir." It started with one. Then a woman in a heavy wool traveling coat saw the man go. She nudged her husband. "Harold, look. A natural wonder." "It's a rock, Martha." "It's educational," she insisted. "And I need to walk." 2 more dimes clinked into Shorty's hand. Then 3. Then a group of 4 men who looked like drummers, arguing about card games, decided to settle a bet about who could spit the furthest off the bridge. Within 5 minutes, there was a line. They moved up the switchback trail like a stream of ants. Shorty stood at the bottom, taking the silver. His hand grew heavy with it. The dimes were cold, but they warmed up fast in his grip. Up at the top, Sarah was waiting. She had the fire going in a stone ring, a big pot of cider bubbling on the grate. Jeb was there with the tin cups. Shorty couldn't see them, but he could hear the voices drifting down. "Oh my," a woman exclaimed. "Look at the drop. You can see the whole valley. Harold, stand by the rail. I want to remember this." Shorty kept taking money. A dime. A dime. A nickel for a kid in knickers who looked at Shorty like he was a giant. The conductor watched from the train steps. He smoked a cigarette, eyeing the procession. He walked over to Shorty. "You running a sideshow, little man?" the conductor asked. "Running a business," Shorty said. He dropped another dime into his pocket. "Keeps the passengers happy. Happy passengers don't complain about the delays." The conductor grunted. "Don't let 'em miss the whistle. I ain't holding the schedule for a rock gazer." "They'll be back," Shorty said. "Cold air makes 'em move fast." And they did come back. They came down the hill flushed, chattering, their breath steaming. They looked alive. They weren't just cargo anymore. They had seen something. They had stood on the edge of the world and looked down, and for a nickel or a dime they felt like explorers. "That was magnificent," the woman named Martha said to Shorty as she passed. "Truly magnificent." "Thank you, ma'am," Shorty said. "And the cider was lovely," she added. "Your wife is a dear." The whistle blew. 3 sharp blasts. The tourists scrambled back onto the cars. The conductor picked up his stool. The doors clanged shut. Shorty stood back as the train hissed and lurched into motion. He watched the faces in the windows. They were pointing up at the ridge now. They were pointing at his farm. Not laughing at the mud, but pointing at the wonder. The train disappeared around the bend. The silence returned, but it wasn't the heavy, crushing silence of before. It was a buzzing silence. Shorty walked up the trail. He didn't feel the incline. His legs felt light. He found Sarah at the top. She was pouring the dregs of the cider onto the ground to put out the fire. Jeb was stacking the cups. "How did we do?" Shorty asked. Sarah looked up. Her cheeks were pink from the cold and the fire. Her eyes were shining. "They drank it all," she said. "Every drop. And they bought the sandwiches. I had to slice the bread so thin you could read a newspaper through it, but they didn't care." Shorty reached into his pockets. He pulled out the handfuls of coins. He dumped them onto the picnic table Shorty had built from the barn scraps. It was a pile of silver. It gleamed against the rough pine. "Count it," Shorty said. Sarah counted. Her fingers moved fast. $4. $4.60 from the food. "And $6.80 from the gate," Shorty said. $11.40. "In 20 minutes, Sarah whispered. Shorty looked at the money. $11. That was a week's worth of eggs. That was half a month of struggle, earned in the time it took to smoke a pipe. He looked at the bridge. It stood there, silent and stony, arching over the chasm. It hadn't done anything. It just sat there, being a rock. And people paid for it. "We beat him," Shorty said softly. "What?" Sarah asked. "The railroad," Shorty said. "The sheriff. The whole damn machine. They tried to tax the dirt, so we sold the view. They tried to tax the mule, so we sold the walk. He picked up a silver dollar. It was heavy. It was real. This is their money, Shorty said. The city money. The railroad money. We're taking it back, Sarah. 1 dime at a time. He looked out over the valley. The scar of the track was still there, ugly and raw. The smoke still hung in the air. But it didn't look like a wound anymore. It looked like a river. A river of commerce that flowed right past his door, and he had finally figured out how to dip his bucket in. We can pay the license fee, Sarah said. And the surcharge. And the snow levy, Shorty added. And buy more sugar. And maybe get Jeb a new pair of boots. Jeb looked up, his eyes wide. Real boots? Not hand-me-downs? Real boots, Shorty promised. With brass eyelets. He scooped the money into the canvas sack Sarah had used for the bread. Let's go home, Shorty said. It's cold up here. They walked back down the trail together. The wind was still biting, but Shorty didn't button his coat. He wanted to feel it. He wanted to feel everything. For the first time in months since the first dynamite blast shook his ground, Shorty Small didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a man who had dug a hole in a stone wall and found gold. He paused at the bottom of the trail and looked at the sign. The whitewash was already starting to streak in the damp air, but the words were clear. Wonder of the West. It surely is, Shorty said. He patted the post. It was solid. He walked toward the cabin, the sack of coins swinging in his hand, keeping time with his step. He thought about Sheriff Boggs. He thought about the man named Martin in the private car. They thought they had him cornered. They thought they had squeezed him dry. They didn't know Shorty Small. They didn't know that a man used to turning rocks over knew exactly where the snakes lived and exactly how to crush them. Tonight, there would be meat in the stew. Tonight, the fire would be high. Tonight, there was hope. Chapter 10. The wind up on the ridge had teeth, but Shorty didn't feel the bite. He was too busy watching the ledger in his head turn from red to black. It was late afternoon on a Tuesday, usually a quiet time, but the 240 freight from Kansas City had been shunted to the siding to let a troop train pass, and the delay had been a windfall. A dozen men in uniforms had climbed the switchback trail, grateful to stretch their legs and spend their pay. They bought all the cider Sarah had left and cleaned out the last of the pickled eggs. Shorty stood by the new railing he'd installed along the cliff edge. It was sturdy oak, peeled and sanded, bolted into the limestone with iron pins he'd forged himself in the barn. He ran a hand along the wood. It felt solid. It felt permanent. Sarah was wiping down the picnic tables. She hummed a little tune, something she hadn't done since the first dynamite blast shook the valley. We need more apples, Sarah said. She tossed the rag into a bucket. And the flour barrel is looking low again. We'll get 'em, Shorty said. He patted his pocket. It jingled. We'll get the good flour this time. The white stuff from St. Louis. Don't go crazy, Shorty. We still owe the license fee. I got the fee, Shorty said. And the surcharge. And the snow levy. I got it all right here. He looked down the trail. The train was gone, leaving only a dissipating trail of smoke in the valley. The silence of the high country was reclaiming the space, but it was a comfortable silence now. It was the silence of a job done and a wage earned. Then the birds stopped singing. Shorty heard the horses first. They were breathing hard, blowing air, as they climbed the steep switchbacks Shorty had cut for pedestrians. These weren't the light steps of mules, they were heavy, shod hooves striking rock. Company, Shorty said. Sarah stopped humming. She moved to stand behind the table, wiping her hands on her apron. Sheriff Boggs rode over the crest of the hill. He looked too big for the trail, his bulk swaying in the saddle. The chestnut mare was lathered, her sides heaving. Behind him rode the deputy with the sour face, his shotgun propped on his hip. Boggs pulled up. He looked at the bridge. He looked at the railing. He looked at the sign Shorty had nailed to the oak tree, "Scenic Overlook." "Quite a climb," Boggs said. He didn't smile. He took off his hat and wiped the sweatband with a thumb. "My horse ain't built for mountain climbing, Shorty." "Trails for walking," Shorty said. "Sign at the bottom says, foot traffic only." "Sheriff don't walk when he can ride," Boggs said. "It's a matter of dignity." He swung down from the saddle. His boots hit the rock with a heavy thud. He walked over to the edge of the chasm and leaned against Shorty's new rail. He tested it with his weight. "Solid," Boggs noted. "You do good work." "I build things to last," Shorty said. "That's the tragedy of it," Boggs said. He turned his back on the view and looked at Shorty. "Building things on shifting sand." Shorty reached into his pocket. He pulled out the canvas sack. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to pay the man and watch him leave. "Tuesday," Shorty said. "License fee. $20. Plus 10% of the gross from the last week." He counted the money out on the picnic table. Silver dollars. Quarters. A stack of paper bills. It was a significant pile. $28.40, Shorty said. "That covers the license and the county cut." Boggs looked at the money. He didn't pick it up. He nudged the pile with his finger, spreading the coins out. "You've had a good week," Boggs said. "We worked for it," Sarah said. Her voice was tight. "I see that," Boggs said. He looked around the clearing. He gestured at the bridge, the tables, the fire ring. "This is quite an operation. You got infrastructure. You got services. You got, what's the word?" "Commerce," Shorty supplied. "Attractions," Boggs corrected. "That's the word. Attractions." He reached into his duster pocket and pulled out a folded paper. It wasn't an envelope this time. It was a single sheet of legal bond, stiff and cream-colored, with the territorial seal embossed at the top in gold foil. "We had a meeting at the county seat yesterday," Boggs said. "The governor himself wired in. He's very concerned about the moral fabric of the territory. With the railroad coming through, we got all sorts of transients. Drifters. Sightseers. I sell 'em apples," Shorty said. "I don't sell 'em whiskey, and I don't sell 'em women." "It ain't about vice, Shorty," Boggs said. "It's about regulation. The governor, he's a close friend of Mr. Martin, you know. He wants to make sure that entertainment venues are contributing their fair share to the public good." Shorty felt the cold knot return to his stomach. It sat there, heavy and hard, displacing the hope he had felt 10 minutes ago. "What is it this time?" Shorty asked. "The Territorial Entertainment Levy," Boggs said. He handed the paper to Shorty. "Passed into law at midnight. Effective immediately." Shorty looked at the paper. The word swam, levy, amusement, per capita. "Read the bottom line," Boggs said helpfully. 15 cents, Shorty read. "Per head." "That's right," Boggs said. "Every person who steps foot on this property for the purpose of leisure or sightseeing owes the territory 15 cents. Shorty looked up. "I charge him a dime." Boggs shrugged. "That sounds like a bad business model, Shorty. If you charge a dime and the tax is 15 cents, you're losing a nickel on every soul that walks up that hill. You want me to pay you for people looking at a rock?" Shorty asked. "More than they pay me." "I don't want anything," Boggs said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. The territory wants it. It's a luxury tax. Sightseeing is a luxury. Breathing air is free, but looking at a view, that costs. I can't charge 'em a quarter, Shorty said. They won't pay it. A dime is the limit. A dime is what a man tosses away without thinking. You ask for a quarter, he keeps walking. Then I guess you got a problem, Boggs said. Because the levy is due weekly, based on your head count. He looked at the ledger Sarah kept on the table. He flipped it open. Let's see, Boggs muttered. 84 visitors this week. Let me do the sums. He pulled a pencil from his pocket and scribbled on the table wood. $12.60, Boggs said. On top of the license fee. On top of the 10%. Shorty looked at the pile of money on the table. It was $28. Take it, Shorty said. He pushed the pile toward Boggs. Take the license. Take the percentage. Take the levy. Just take it and go. I will, Boggs said. He swept the money into his hand, coins clinking. But that leaves you short, Shorty. You owe me another $4 for the levy. I don't have $4, Shorty said. That's it. That's every dime in the box. Boggs tutted. He shook his head. Deficit spending. It's a dangerous habit. Tell you what. I'll add the $4 to your tab. But the interest rate goes up. You know how banks are. I ain't borrowing from a bank, Shorty said. I'm being robbed by a badge. The deputy stiffened. He racked the slide on his shotgun. Clack, clack. Boggs didn't flinch. He just smiled that tombstone smile. Robbery is illegal, Shorty. Taxation is civilization. You ought to be proud. You're helping us build the future. What future? Sarah asked. She stepped forward, her hands trembling. We gave you everything. The eggs. The pies. The view. What are you building that costs so much? Boggs looked at her. He put the money in his pocket. A jail, ma'am, Boggs said. A jail? Shorty asked. Big one, Boggs said. Brick. Iron bars shipped in on the very train you're servicing. We need a secure facility. The county is changing. We got agitators. People who don't respect the law. People who don't pay their taxes. He looked directly at Shorty. The threat wasn't veiled anymore. It was naked. It's ironic, ain't it? Boggs said. You working so hard, sweating over this rock pile, earning nickels and dimes, just to pay for the bricks that are going to hold you when you finally run out of money. Shorty looked at the post hole digger, leaning against the tree. It was 5 steps away. Boggs saw the look. He rested his hand on his revolver. Don't, Boggs said softly. The jail ain't built yet, Shorty. If I have to take you in today, I don't have a cell. I'd have to use a rope. Shorty didn't move. He stood rooted to the limestone, feeling the weight of the mountain under his feet and the weight of the law on his neck. We're done here, Shorty said. For today, Boggs agreed. I'll be back next Tuesday. Have the levy ready. And maybe raise your prices. Inflation is a bear. Boggs climbed back onto his horse. The mare grunted under his weight. He tipped his hat to Sarah. Lovely view, ma'am. Shame it's so expensive. He turned the horse and started down the switchback trail. The deputy followed, keeping his eyes on Shorty until the brush swallowed them up. Shorty stood by the table. The money was gone. The ledger was open to the page where Boggs had done his math on the wood. 12.60. It wasn't a number. It was a wall. Sarah sat down on the bench. She put her head in her hands. She didn't cry. She was past crying. "They won't let us win," she whispered. "It doesn't matter what we do. They move the line." Shorty walked to the edge of the chasm. He looked at the bridge. It was glowing in the sunset, a bridge to nowhere. He had built a road, built a rail, invited the world in, and all he had done was build a toll booth for Silas Martin. "He's right," Shorty said. "About the prices?" Sarah asked. "About the jail," Shorty said. He gripped the rail he had sanded so carefully. "We're paying for the cage. Every dime we hand him buys another bar." He looked down into the dark water, churning at the bottom of the gorge. "I can't farm the rocks," Shorty said. "I can't sell the view. Everything I touch turns to his money." He turned back to Sarah. His face was hard, the lines around his eyes etched deep by the wind and the realization. "We can't pay 15 cents a head, Shorty," Sarah said. "It's over." "The paying is over," Shorty agreed. He walked over to the table and closed the ledger. He picked up the pencil Boggs had used. He snapped it in half. "Next Tuesday," Shorty said. "He comes back next Tuesday." "What do we do?" "We stop digging," Shorty said. "And we start filling the hole." He looked at the sign, Wonder of the West. "Wonder is over," Shorty said. "Now comes the reality." Chapter 11. Tuesday arrived with a sky the color of a wet slate, and a wind that rattled the loose shingles on the barn roof like dice in a cup. Shorty didn't go up to the bridge. He didn't fire up the cider pot. He sat on the front porch steps, whittling a piece of hickory into a sharp point, shaving the wood in long curling strips that fell around his boots. The shotgun leaned against the rail, just out of arm's reach. It was cold steel and oiled walnut, silent and waiting. Sarah was inside with the boys. Shorty had told them to stay put. He didn't want them to see the math he was about to do. Sheriff Boggs didn't disappoint. He rode up the lane at noon, right on schedule. He was alone this time, leaving the sour-faced deputy back in town or maybe guarding the jail site they were so eager to build. Boggs looked big in the saddle, his duster flapping around his legs, his face flushed with the cold, and the confidence of a man holding a royal flush. He pulled the chestnut mare up at the gate. He didn't get down. He sat there, looking at Shorty, looking at the empty yard, looking at the sign Shorty had dragged down from the ridge and leaned against the fence. The sign was painted over. A broad streak of black paint crossed out Wonder of the West. Underneath, in fresh letters, it read, "Closed by order of the county." "You gave up," Boggs said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, delivered with a smirk that showed his gold tooth. Shorty kept whittling. Scritch. Scritch. "Didn't give up," Shorty said without looking up. "Just did the sums. Can't sell a dime for 15 cents. That ain't commerce. That's charity." "The territory appreciates your compliance," Boggs said. "But closing the attraction doesn't erase the debt, Shorty. You still owe the levy from last week, plus the license fee for the current week. The meter runs whether the water flows or not." Shorty stopped whittling. He stuck the knife into the hickory stick and stood up. He walked to the gate. He didn't have a sack of money this time. He had empty hands. "I ain't got it," Shorty said. Boggs sighed. A theatrical, heavy sigh that puffed white in the chill air. "I was afraid of that. You had such promise, Shorty. A real entrepreneur. But capital is a fickle mistress." "It ain't fickle," Shorty said. "It's stolen. You taxed the pie till there was no crust left. You taxed the view till it went blind. There ain't nothing left to squeeze, Sheriff. The turnip is dry. Boggs swung his leg over the saddle horn and slid to the ground. He tied the mare to the fence post, taking his time, checking the knot. He walked toward the porch, stopping 3 feet from Shorty. He smelled of tobacco and stale coffee. Dry is a relative term, Boggs said. He looked past Shorty at the cabin. You got a roof. You got livestock. You got land. The land is vertical, Shorty reminded him. You said it yourself. Worth 2 cents an acre. That was before, Boggs said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cigar. He bit the end off and spat it onto Shorty's boot. See Mr. Martin, Silas Martin, the man who owns the tracks, he's a visionary. He looks at a hole in the ground and sees a tunnel. He looks at a flat spot by the creek and sees a depot. Shorty went still. A depot? Big one, Boggs said, lighting the match on his thumbnail. Passenger terminal. Freight siding. Coal chutes. The works. Gonna serve the whole territory. Put this valley on the map. My valley, Shorty said. His valley, Boggs corrected, puffing smoke. He just lets you sit on it. For now. So that's it, Shorty said. The realization hit him, cold and hard. The taxes. The levies. The license fees. It wasn't about the jail. It wasn't about the road. It's always about the road, Shorty. Just not the way you thought. Boggs took a step closer, invading Shorty's space. He was a head taller, heavier, a wall of authority wrapped in wool and leather. He wants the land, Shorty said. And he wants it cheap. He wants it free, Boggs said. He figures, if we bleed you long enough, you'll dry up and blow away. You'll default on the taxes. The county seizes the deed, and Mr. Martin buys it at auction for $1. Clean title. No fuss. You're squeezing me out, Shorty said. You and the railroad. You're bandits. Boggs laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. Bandits wear masks, Shorty. I wear a star. That makes it politics. I paid, Shorty said, his voice rising. I paid every dime. I worked the rocks. I sold the pies. I built the bridge. I did everything, honest. And look where it got you, Boggs said. Standing in the dirt with empty pockets. I ain't moving, Shorty said. He set his jaw. I ain't leaving. This is my home. My kids were born here. Your kids are going to starve here, Boggs said. Look at you. You're pathetic. A little man trying to hold back the tide with a shovel. You're a stubborn mule, Shorty. And you know what we do with mules that won't pull? We shoot 'em, Shorty said. We break 'em, Boggs hissed. We break 'em until they don't know which way is up, and then we turn 'em into glue. He reached out and poked Shorty in the chest with a gloved finger. It was a hard jab, right on the breastbone. You're in the way, Boggs said. Poke. You're an obstruction. Poke. You're a relic. Shorty swatted the hand away. Don't touch me. Boggs' face darkened. The amusement vanished, replaced by the brutality that lived just under the skin. You touch a lawman. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't have to. He just stepped in and shoved. It was a hard, two-handed push. Shorty, balanced on his heels, wasn't ready for it. He stumbled back, his boots catching on a tree root. He went down hard, hitting the frozen dirt with a thud that rattled his teeth. His hat flew off. He lay there for a second, looking up at the gray sky. Look at you, Boggs sneered, standing over him. Dirt farmer in the dirt. That's the natural order, Shorty. Gravity. Shorty turned his head. The shotgun was leaning against the porch rail. It was 3 feet away. The barrels were dark, 2 eyes staring back at him. The stock was scarred from years of use, smoothed by his own hands. He could reach it. He could roll, grab the stock, and bring it up. He was fast. He'd practiced it 1,000 times on coyotes and snakes. He could put 2 loads of buckshot into Sheriff Boggs before the man could clear leather. He felt the wood of the porch step against his shoulder. He felt the cold earth under his hand. His fingers twitched, brushing the grip of the shotgun. Time seemed to slow down. He saw the texture of the sheriff's boots. He saw the mud on the hem of the duster. He saw the arrogance in Boggs' eyes. If he pulled the trigger, it was over. The farm was gone. His life was gone. He'd be a killer. But if he didn't? Boggs watched him. He saw Shorty's hand near the gun. He didn't move to stop him. He almost looked like he wanted it. He wanted the excuse. Self-defense against a lunatic farmer. It would be a clean kill, and the deed would transfer by sunset. "Go ahead," Boggs whispered. "Pick it up. Be a man for once." Shorty looked at the gun. Then he looked at Boggs. Something shifted in Shorty's chest. A latch clicked open, or maybe it clicked shut. The fear of the taxes, the fear of the hunger, the fear of the law, evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, clear certainty. He wasn't going to play their game anymore. He wasn't going to try to pay the unpayable. And he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of shooting him in his own yard. Shorty pulled his hand back. He pushed himself up to a sitting position. He picked up his hat and dusted it off. "No," Shorty said. Boggs looked disappointed. He relaxed his hand near his holster. Smart. Cowardly, but smart. Shorty stood up. He didn't brush the dirt off his overalls. He wore it like armor. "Get off my land," Shorty said. "Your land?" Boggs laughed. "You got 24 hours, Shorty. I'll be back tomorrow with the eviction notice. Failure to pay taxes. Seizure of property. Pack your wagon. And leave the mule. The county claims it as partial payment." Boggs turned his back. He walked to his horse, untied the reins, and swung up into the saddle. He looked down at Shorty one last time. "Progress, Shorty," Boggs said. "It's a heavy wheel. Don't get under it." He kicked the mare and rode out, the hooves throwing clods of frozen mud onto Shorty's porch. Shorty stood there until the rider disappeared into the trees. The wind picked up, howling through the chasm. Sarah opened the door. She stepped out, holding Mary. Her face was white. "Shorty," she whispered. "What did he say?" Shorty turned to her. His eyes were different. The soft, patient look of the man who moved rocks was gone. In its place was the flat, hard look of the rock itself. "He said we're done," Shorty said. "Done?" "Done farming," Shorty said. "Done paying." He walked over to the shotgun. He picked it up. He broke the action and checked the loads. They were there. Brass and lead. Waiting. "He wants the land," Shorty said to the cold air. "He wants the depot. He wants the future." He snapped the gun shut. "He can have the dirt," Shorty said. "But he ain't taking the harvest." He looked at Sarah. "Pack the wagon," Shorty said. "Just the clothes and the food. Leave the furniture. Leave the plow." "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "You're going to your sister's in Fayetteville," Shorty said. "Take the boys. Take the mule. And you." Shorty looked down the road, toward the track where the iron horse ran, carrying Martin and his money and his laws. "I got one more crop to bring in," Shorty said. He walked into the house, the shotgun heavy in his hand, leaving the whittled stick and the shavings on the porch to blow away in the coming storm. Chapter 12. The sun didn't bother coming out. The sky hung low and gray, like a dirty sheet pulled over a corpse. It was 10 in the morning, but it felt like twilight. Shorty stood on the porch. He wasn't whittling today. He was watching the road. Sarah had the wagon loaded. It was parked by the barn, the mule hitched and waiting. The boys were sitting in the back on a pile of quilts, looking small and scared. They didn't ask why they were leaving. They knew better than to ask questions when their father had that look in his eye, the look of a man who had stopped calculating and started counting ammo. "They're coming," Shorty said. He didn't need to see them to know. The birds in the lower woods had gone quiet. A deer had bolted across the clearing 5 minutes ago, white tail flashing. Then the riders appeared. It wasn't just Boggs this time. It was a parade. Sheriff Boggs rode in front on his chestnut mare. Behind him were 6 men. 2 were deputies, wearing badges that looked dull in the flat light. The other 4 were hard cases, men in long dusters with low-slung holsters and Winchester scabbards on their saddles. They didn't look like law. They looked like the kind of trouble you hired when you wanted to make sure nobody argued. They rode into the yard and fanned out, forming a semicircle facing the porch. The horses blew steam, stamping the frozen ground. Shorty stepped down to the bottom step. He didn't have the shotgun in his hands. It was leaning against the doorframe behind him. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his overalls, looking at Boggs. "Morning, Shorty," Boggs said. He sounded cheerful, like a man arriving for a Sunday dinner. "You look packed." "Wagon's loaded," Shorty said. "That's sensible," Boggs said. "I told Mr. Martin you were a sensible man. Stubborn, but sensible." He reached into his coat and pulled out a rolled paper tied with red ribbon. He tossed it onto the frozen mud at Shorty's feet. "Eviction notice," Boggs announced. "Signed by Judge Holloway this morning. Seizure of property for non-payment of territorial taxes, county levies, and licensing fees. Total debt, $412. $400, Shorty repeated. It went up overnight. Administrative costs, Boggs grinned. Paperwork is expensive. And the posse requires a per diem. One of the hired guns, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, spat tobacco juice onto the clean snow near the flower beds Sarah had planted in the spring. "Nice place," the scarred man said. "Ideally situated." "It was," Shorty said. "The order gives you 24 hours to vacate," Boggs said. "But since you're already hitched up, I figure we can speed up the timeline. We'll take possession now. Save you the trouble of coming back to lock up." "I got 24 hours, Shorty said. "Paper says so." "Paper says what I tell it to say," Boggs said. His voice hardened. "And I say you go now. Before we start breaking things to help you pack." From under the porch, a low growl rumbled. It was Buster, the old coonhound Shorty had raised from a pup. Buster was half-blind and mostly deaf, but he knew bad intentions when he smelled them. He came slinking out, hackles raised, teeth bared in a snarl that was more gum than ivory. He barked. It was a deep, chesty woof directed at the scarred man's horse. The horse shied, dancing sideways. "Get that cur under control," the scarred man snapped. "He's on his own porch," Shorty said. "He don't like strangers." Buster barked again, taking a stiff-legged step forward. The scarred man didn't hesitate. He didn't yell. He didn't reach for a whip. He drew his revolver, a heavy Colt Dragoon, and fired in one smooth motion. Crack. The sound was shocking in the cold air. Buster yelped, a short, sharp sound, and dropped in the dirt. He kicked once and went still. A dark stain began to spread on the frozen ground. Sarah screamed from the wagon. The boys started crying. Shorty went rigid. He looked at the dog. He looked at the man with the smoking gun. "Warning," the scarred man said, holstering the weapon. "Next one is for the mule." Shorty looked at the shotgun leaning by the door. It was 5 feet away. He could get to it. He could kill the man with the scar. He could probably get Boggs too. But there were 7 of them. And Sarah was 10 yards away in the wagon. Shorty forced his hands to stay at his sides. He forced his breath to come out slow. "You didn't have to do that," Shorty said. His voice sounded like it was coming from a deep well. "He was a threat," Boggs said. "Resisting an officer. We don't tolerate resistance, Shorty. Man or beast." Boggs looked over at the wagon. "Ma'am, you best get that mule moving. The air is getting unhealthy here." Shorty turned to Sarah. She was clutching Mary, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Shorty, waiting for him to explode, waiting for him to do what the Shorty Small of the stories would do. "Go," Shorty said. "Shorty," she sobbed. "Come with us." "I got to finish up," Shorty said. "I got to bury the dog." "We can't leave you," she said. "Go to Fayetteville," Shorty ordered. "Stay with your sister. Don't look back. Don't stop until you cross the county line." He walked over to the wagon. He reached up and touched Jeb's hand. "You take care of your ma," Shorty said. "You're the man now." "Pa," Jeb whispered. "Go," Shorty said, slapping the mule's rump. "Hup, Barnaby." The mule leaned into the harness. The wagon creaked and rolled forward, wheels crunching on the gravel. Sarah looked back, her face a mask of anguish, until the trees swallowed them up. Shorty stood alone in the yard. The dog lay at his feet. The 7 men on horses watched him. "See," Boggs said. "That wasn't so hard. Just gravity, Shorty. Things rolled downhill." "You got your land," Shorty said. He didn't look up. "We do," Boggs said. "We'll have a crew up here tomorrow to start grading for the depot. I expect you gone by then. If I find you here at sunrise, well, Buster needs company." Boggs whistled. "Let's ride, boys. Drinks are on Mr. Martin." The posse turned their horses. They rode out of the yard, laughing, the tension breaking now that the show was over. The scarred man lit a cigarette and threw the match on Buster's body. Shorty waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded to nothing. He walked to the porch and picked up the shotgun. It was cold in his hands. He walked to the tool shed and got a shovel. He buried Buster under the big oak tree, next to the spot where he used to eat his lunch while he watched the boys clear rocks. He packed the dirt down tight. Then he went into the house. It was empty. The furniture was still there, the table he made, the chairs, the beds. But the life was gone. It felt like a tomb. He went to the loose floorboard under the bed. He pried it up. Inside was a small tin box. He opened it. There was $20 in there, money he had held back, money he hadn't told Sarah about. Not because he didn't trust her, but because a man always keeps a reserve for ammunition. He put the money in his pocket. He went to the fireplace. He didn't light a fire. He sat in the rocking chair in the cold room. He pulled a rag and a bottle of oil from his pocket. He began to clean the shotgun. He wiped the barrels. He oiled the mechanism. He checked the springs on the hammers. They thought he was beaten. They thought taking the land and scaring his family was the end of it. They thought Shorty Small was just a dirt farmer who would walk away with his head down. Shorty snapped the shotgun closed. Clack. They were right about the farmer part. He was a farmer, and he had one more crop to harvest. He stood up and walked to the door. He looked out at the gray afternoon. 24 hours, Shorty said to the empty yard. He wasn't going to Fayetteville. He wasn't going to run. He put on his heavy coat. He stuffed his pockets with shells. He took a sack of flour from the pantry, the cheap stuff gray and dusty. He cut 2 holes in it. He folded the sack and put it in his pocket. Shorty Small walked off the porch. He didn't look back at the house. He walked toward the woods. Chapter 13. The flour sack smelled of stale wheat and the dry, dusty scent of the pantry shelf where it had sat for 6 months. Shorty had cut the eye holes with his pocket knife, jagged slits that limited his vision to a narrow tunnel of gray woods and frozen mud. He pulled the rough cotton down over his hat, tucking the ends into the collar of his coat. He breathed in. The fabric sucked against his mouth. He breathed out. It puffed away, warm and damp. He sat on a fallen sycamore log, his back pressed against the rot of the trunk. The bark was cold, seeping through his heavy wool coat, but Shorty didn't move to warm himself. He held the shotgun across his knees. The hammers were thumbed back, resting on the firing pins. He was 3 miles from the farm, down in the hollow where the trail narrowed to a single track between a limestone bluff and a dense thicket of briar. It was a choke point. Anyone riding from the valley to the railhead had to pass through here. And someone was coming. Shorty heard the jingle of a bridle chain first, then the squeak of saddle leather, then the heavy rhythmic clop-squelch of a horse walking through half-frozen mud. It wasn't a posse. It was a single rider. Shorty shifted his weight, easing his boots into the mulch to get a solid footing. He checked the wind. It was blowing toward him, carrying the scent of damp wool and tobacco smoke. The rider came around the bend. It was Deputy Elkins, the sour-faced man who had spat tobacco on Shorty's sign. He was riding a roan gelding that looked tired. A heavy canvas saddlebag, stamped with the seal of the county tax assessor, was slung over the pommel. Elkins looked bored. He had a cigarette dangling from his lip, and his shotgun was sheathed in the scabbard, the leather strap buckled over the stock. He wasn't expecting trouble. The valley was pacified. The evictions were served. The farmers were packing up or already gone. Elkins was just the courier, hauling the harvest of silver and paper to the evening train. Shorty waited until the horse was 10 feet away. He stood up. He didn't jump. He just rose from the brush like a gray ghost, the flour sack masking his face, the shotgun leveled at the deputy's chest. "Whoa," Shorty said. The horse spooked. It reared, whinnying, its hooves splashing in a puddle. Elkins grabbed the horn to keep from sliding off. The cigarette fell from his mouth. "What the hell?" Elkins shouted. He saw the figure. He saw the twin black eyes of the shotgun barrels. Elkins reached for the scabbard. "Don't," Shorty said. The flour sack muffled his voice, making it sound hollow, flat. "You unbuckle that strap, you fall off the horse in pieces." Elkins froze. His hand hovered over the leather flap. He looked at the brush. He looked at the bluff. He was looking for the rest of the gang. "Just me," Shorty said. "Hands on the horn. Lace 'em together." Elkins did as he was told. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. "You know who I am. I'm a deputy of the territory." "I see the badge," Shorty said. "It shines real nice." "Step down." "This is government property," Elkins stammered. "The money, it's tax revenue. Federal crime to touch it." "Step down," Shorty repeated. He twitched the barrels. Elkins swung his leg over and slid to the ground. He kept his hands raised. "Tie the horse," Shorty said. "To the sapling. Use a good knot." I don't want him running off. Elkins tied the roan. His hands were shaking so bad he fumbled the reins twice. Bring the bag, Shorty ordered. Elkins unhooked the canvas sack from the saddle. It was heavy. It clinked as he pulled it free. He walked over to where Shorty stood, stopping 3 paces away. Drop it. Elkins dropped the bag. It hit the mud with a solid thud. You're making a mistake, Elkins said, his voice trembling. Sheriff Boggs will hunt you down. He's got a posse still saddled. Lie down, Shorty said. Face in the dirt. Hands behind your head. In the mud. Mud washes off, Shorty said. Buckshot don't. Lie down. Elkins got down. He lay prone in the muck, interlocking his fingers behind his greasy hair. He was breathing fast, shallow gasps. Shorty kept the shotgun trained on the deputy with one hand. With the other, he reached down and grabbed the canvas sack. He backed up to the fallen log and sat down, resting the gun on his thigh, pointed at Elkins' head. He opened the sack. Inside were smaller bags tied with twine. Some were marked with names. Miller. Henderson. O'Malley. Shorty untied them. He dumped the contents onto the log. A river of commerce flowed out, silver dollars, worn quarters, greasy greenbacks. It was the lifeblood of the valley, squeezed out drop by drop. That's over $1,000, Elkins said into the dirt. You take that, you're robbing the railroad. I ain't robbing the railroad, Shorty said. I'm auditing the books. Shorty began to count. He picked up the coins with his gloved fingers. He moved them into a separate pile on the log. 50, Shorty counted. That was the first improvement tax. The money he made selling the first batch of eggs. 20, he added. The license fee. $12.60, he counted out in dimes and nickels. The levy on the bridge traffic. $4, he added. The deficit Boggs had tacked on. $2.40 for the flour and sugar tax. Shorty paused. He looked at the pile. $89. That was the cash he had handed over. That was the sweat from his back and the heat from Sarah's oven. Then he thought about Buster. He thought about the old dog lying under the oak tree with a bullet in his ribs. A dog wasn't livestock. You couldn't put a price on a dog. But Boggs had charged him for existing, so Shorty figured he'd charge Boggs for the funeral. $10, Shorty said. For the burial. He added a $10 gold piece to his pile. $99. He looked at the rest of the money on the log. Hundreds of dollars. Money that belonged to the Millers and the Hendersons. He could take it. He could take it all and ride for the border. It would set him up for a year. But that wasn't the point. Shorty Small wasn't a thief. He was a farmer settling a bill. He swept the rest of the money that wasn't his, back into the canvas sack. He tied the string tight. He took the pile he had counted out, $99, and shoved it into the pocket of his heavy coat. You done? Elkins asked, lifting his head slightly. Keep your face down, Shorty snapped. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out the eviction notice Boggs had thrown at his feet that morning. The red ribbon was gone, but the paper was stiff and official. Shorty turned it over. He took a piece of charcoal he'd grabbed from the fireplace before leaving the cabin. He wrote on the blank back of the legal bond. The charcoal crumbled, making thick dark lines. Refund for illegal taxation. $99. Account closed. He signed it at the bottom. The taxpayer. Shorty folded the paper and tucked it under the twine of the canvas sack, so the white side with the charcoal writing was facing up. Stand up, Shorty said. Elkins scrambled to his feet. He looked at the sack on the log. He looked at the pile of money Shorty had taken. He looked confused. You're leaving the rest?" Elkins asked. "Ain't mine," Shorty said. "It belongs to the neighbors. You tell Boggs to deliver it to the train. I ain't a bandit. I'm just correcting an error." "He won't see it that way," Elkins said. "He'll see a man in a mask with a gun." "He'll see the receipt," Shorty said. "Pick it up." Elkins grabbed the sack. He clutched it to his chest like a baby. "Get on the horse," Shorty ordered. Elkins untied the roan and mounted up. He gathered the reins, looking down at Shorty. The fear was ebbing, replaced by a sneering curiosity. "You think this makes you square?" Elkins asked. "You think you can just take your money back and walk away?" "I think the ledger balances," Shorty said. "For now." "He'll kill you," Elkins said. "He'll hang you from the bridge you built." "He's got to catch me first," Shorty said. "Ride. And don't look back." Elkins kicked the horse. The roan broke into a trot, splashing through the mud, heading toward the railhead. Shorty watched him go. He waited until the rider was around the bend. He lowered the shotgun. He pulled the flour sack off his head. The air tasted clean and cold against his sweaty face. He patted his pocket. The money was a lump against his hip. It wasn't a fortune. It was just what he had earned. He looked at the charcoal stains on his fingers. He hadn't run. He hadn't folded. He had stood on the trail and demanded his due. Shorty Small turned and walked into the deep woods, moving away from the trail, away from the farm, and into the high rocky hills where the law couldn't ride. He wasn't a farmer anymore. The sheriff was right about that. Chapter 14. The telegraph office in the railhead town of Cotter's Junction had been commandeered 3 weeks ago. Silas Martin didn't like the drafty building with its peeling paint and potbelly stove that smoked more than it heated, but it was the nerve center of the operation. From here, the copper wires stretched east to St. Louis and Washington, humming with the orders that moved steel and money. Martin stood by the window, watching the rain turn the main street into a river of brown slurry. He held a cup of tea in a china saucer he traveled with. He didn't drink coffee. Coffee was for men who needed to stay awake to work. Tea was for men who paid others to be tired. Congressman Leach was sitting near the stove, warming his hands. He looked nervous. He usually looked nervous when he was this far from a marble hallway. "The schedule is slipping, Silas," Leach said. "The tunnel crew is 2 days behind. The investors in Boston are asking about the ribbon cutting." "The investors are impatient children," Martin said without turning. "They want the toy without understanding the assembly instructions." "And the tax revenue?" Leach asked. "The Interior Committee is expecting the surcharge report." "The revenue is on its way," Martin said. "Sheriff Boggs is a blunt instrument, but he is reliable. He sweeps the floor, and he brings us the dust." The door opened. A gust of wet wind blew into the room, causing the stove to flare and smoke. Sheriff Boggs stepped inside. He looked like a man who had ridden through a swamp and lost. His duster was soaked, heavy with mud. His hat was pulled low, dripping water onto the floorboards. He didn't have the swagger of the man who had evicted Shorty Small yesterday. He had the slumped shoulders of a man bringing bad news to a king. He held the canvas sack in one hand. It looked deflated. Martin turned from the window. He took a sip of tea. "You're dripping on the floor, Sheriff." "Sorry, Mr. Martin," Boggs said. He took off his hat. His hair was plastered to his skull. "Roads are bad." "You have the collection." "I have." Most of it, Boggs said. He walked to the desk, a scarred oak table Martin had covered with a linen cloth, and set the sack down. He didn't drop it with a heavy thud this time. He set it down gently, like it might explode. Martin walked over. He looked at the sack. He looked at Boggs. "Define most," Martin said. "We had an incident," Boggs said. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Deputy Elkins. He was riding the courier route, coming out of the hollow near the Small place." "Small," Martin said. The name tasted like ash. "The mule farmer. The one you evicted." "That's him," Boggs said. "Elkins says he was ambushed. Man in a mask. Flour sack over his head. Came out of the brush with a shotgun." Leach stood up, alarmed. "A robbery. Highwayman. Good God, Silas. If the papers hear about bandits on the line, the stock will plummet." "Quiet, Thaddeus," Martin snapped. He kept his eyes on Boggs. "A bandit. One man?" "One man," Boggs admitted. "Elkins says he got the drop on him. Took the bag. And then he opened it," Boggs said. "He counted out $99. Exactly." Martin raised an eyebrow. "He counted it?" "He took back what he paid," Boggs said. "The taxes, the fees, the levy, and $10 for his dog." "His dog?" We had to shoot his dog yesterday. During the eviction." Martin stared at the sheriff. A cold, flat amusement flickered in his eyes, but it didn't reach his mouth. "He audited you, Sheriff. He held you up at gunpoint to balance his checkbook." "He left the rest," Boggs said quickly. "The sack is full. The Miller money, the Henderson money, it's all there. He just took his cut. And he left a receipt." Martin reached into the sack. Under the twine, he found the folded piece of paper. It was the stiff, cream-colored bond of the eviction notice. He unfolded it. He looked at the jagged charcoal letters scrawled on the back. "Refund for illegal taxation. $99. Account closed. The taxpayer." Martin stared at the paper. He ran his thumb over the charcoal, smudging the black dust. It was crude. It was primitive. And it was the most dangerous thing he had ever seen. "The taxpayer," Martin read aloud. "He's crazy," Boggs said. "He's hiding in the hills. I'll get a posse, Mr. Martin. I'll hunt him down. We'll hang him for robbery." "This isn't robbery," Martin said softly. He walked back to the window, holding the paper. He looked out at the rain. "Robbery is a transaction," Martin said. "A man wants money, he takes it. It's simple greed. I understand greed. I can manipulate greed." He turned back to the room, shaking the paper. This is an ideology. He didn't take the rest of the money, Sheriff. He left thousands of dollars on a log. Do you understand what that means?" Boggs looked blank. "It means he's stupid." "It means he's moral," Martin hissed. "It means he believes he is right. And a man who believes he is right is infinitely more dangerous than a man who just wants to be rich." Leach walked over and looked at the note. "Refund for illegal taxation," Leach read. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Silas, if this gets out, if the other farmers hear that a man can just hold up a deputy and get a refund, we'll have a revolt. They'll stop paying. They'll start shooting." "Exactly," Martin said. He walked to the stove. He looked at the fire, visible through the grate. He thought about burning the note. No. He folded it carefully and put it in his breast pocket right next to his heart. "He isn't a farmer anymore," Martin said. And he isn't a bandit. He's a symbol. I can catch him, Boggs insisted. He's on foot. He's got a mule and a shotgun. He can't go far. I don't want you to catch him, Martin said. Boggs blinked. Sir. If you catch him, we have to try him, Martin said. We have to put him in a courtroom. And in a courtroom, he gets to talk. He gets to tell the jury about the pies and the bridge and the dog. He gets to wave this receipt around. Martin walked over to Boggs. He stood close enough that Boggs could smell the tea and the expensive cologne. I don't want a trial, Sheriff. Trials create martyrs. I want a tragedy. A tragedy, Boggs repeated, the light dawning in his dull eyes. I want an example, Martin said. I want Shorty Small found in the woods. I want him dead. And when you write the report, he didn't take $99. He took it all. He was a thief, a drunk, and he died resisting arrest. Do you understand? Dead, Boggs said. No talk. Silence is the only verdict I will accept, Martin said. Make him disappear. Erase him. And do it before he inspires anyone else to audit the county. I'll need men, Boggs said. He knows the hills. He's like a goat in those rocks. Take as many as you need, Martin said. Hire the track layers if you have to. Pay them a bounty. $10 a head. But bring me his shotgun. I want it for my wall. Boggs nodded. He put his hat back on. He looked relieved to have a simple order: kill. That was something he understood. I'll get it done, Mr. Martin. Boggs turned and left, the door slamming behind him. Martin turned to Leach. The congressman was pacing, wringing his soft hands. This is bad, Silas. This is very bad. A rogue element. Violence. Stop fluttering, Thaddeus, Martin said. He sat down at the desk. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer and dipped a pen in the inkwell. What are you doing? Leach asked. Insurance, Martin said. The sheriff is incompetent. We both know that. Shorty Small outsmarted him with a flour sack. If Boggs fails, we need a hammer. Martin began to write. His penmanship was elegant, sharp, and decisive. 2. U.S. Marshal Service, Territorial Division. From Office of Congressman Leach. You're using my name? Leach squeaked. I am, Martin said, writing as he spoke. Urgent. Violent insurrection in Cotter's Valley. Organized gang targeting federal rail project. Local law enforcement overwhelmed. Request immediate DEPUTIZATION and support. Stop. Insurrection? Leach peered over his shoulder. Gang. Silas, it's one man with a mule. Washington doesn't send marshals for one man, Martin said, blowing on the ink to dry it. They send marshals for insurrections. They send marshals when the flow of commerce is threatened by anarchy. He handed the paper to the telegraph operator, who sat in the corner, a silent man who knew better than to listen to anything that wasn't code. Send it, Martin ordered. Priority 1. He stood up and walked back to the window. The rain was coming down harder now, washing the mud of the street away, exposing the hard rock underneath. Small wants a war, Martin said to the reflection in the glass. He wants to fight the future. He touched the pocket where the receipt lay. He thinks he's fighting a man, Martin whispered. He doesn't know he's fighting the century. And the century always wins. He turned to Leach. Pour the brandy, Thaddeus. We have a rebellion to crush. Chapter 15. Shorty Small wasn't a chemist, but he knew about friction. He knew that a plowshare moved easier through damp earth than dry clay, and he knew that an iron wheel needed grip to climb a hill. He was kneeling by the tracks at the bottom of Dead Man's Rise, a 2-mile grade where the trans-territory line had to chew hard to get up the incline. It was the steepest pull in the county. The engineers cursed it. The firemen shoveled coal until their backs screamed, and the wheels bit into the sand the locomotives dropped just to keep from slipping backward. Shorty had a bucket. It wasn't full of sand. It was full of rendered hog fat, the stuff he'd saved for soap making before the eviction. It was white, slick, and heavy. He had a mop made of old rags tied to a hickory stick. Slap. Swish. He painted the railhead. He didn't do the whole 2 miles. He just did 100 yards right where the grade got serious, right where the engine would be huffing the hardest. He coated the top of the cold steel with a thick, gleaming layer of lard. He did the left rail. Then he stepped over and did the right. It was quiet work. The wind was down, and the woods were holding their breath. Shorty checked the sun. It was past 2. The 3:10 Express was the money train. He'd heard the track layers talking about it when they bought pies. Friday afternoon, they'd said. That's when the payroll comes. That's when the tax money goes east. Shorty finished the job. He tossed the mop into the brush. He picked up the bucket and walked up the embankment to where Barnaby was tied. The mule looked at him, ears twitching. "Don't look at me like that," Shorty said. "It's just grease. Same stuff we put on the wagon axle, only we're putting it in the wrong place on purpose." He pulled the flour sack hood over his head. He picked up the shotgun. He waited. At 3:05, the ground started to hum. It was a low vibration, like a heavy door sliding shut in the distance. Then the smoke appeared above the tree line, a dark smudge against the gray sky. The 3:10 was on time. Shorty watched from behind a stand of scrub oak. The engine, a massive 440 American, came around the bend, hitting the bottom of the grade with a head of steam. The engineer opened the throttle, anticipating the climb. The exhaust chugged, chuff, 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 getting louder, deeper. The cowcatcher bit into the incline. The drive wheels turned, heavy steel biting into iron. Then they hit the lard. The sound changed instantly. The rhythmic chugging turned into a high-pitched scream of revving machinery. The drive wheels lost purchase. They spun. They spun wild, turning 100 miles an hour while the train was doing 10. The engineer reacted fast, cutting the throttle and hitting the sanders. Sand poured onto the rails, trying to find grit. But the hog fat was too thick. It mixed with the sand and turned into a grinding paste. The momentum died. The massive engine shuddered, the connecting rods blurring as the wheels spun uselessly. Gravity took over. The train stopped climbing. It hung there for a second, 100 tons of steel suspended on a greased skillet. Then it started to slide. Not backward. The engineers slammed the brakes, locking the wheels. But locked wheels on grease don't stop, they skate. The train slid slowly, painfully, back down the grade. It picked up a little speed, just enough to be dangerous. The rear truck of the tender hit the switch Shorty had thrown 10 minutes ago, a switch that led to an old spur line used for offloading timber. The spur ended in a mud bank 50 yards in. The tender jerked sideways, dragging the engine with it. The coupling groaned, screaming like a dying animal. The engine tilted, wheels leaving the high rail, and plowed into the soft red earth of the embankment. It didn't crash. It just slumped. It slid off the rails and settled into the mud with a heavy, final whump, hissing steam and looking embarrassed. The cars behind it, the express car and 2 passenger coaches, stayed upright but jerked to a violent halt, derailed by the angle of the engine. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of escaping steam and the shouting of men. Shorty stepped out of the brush. He walked down the slope. He didn't run. He walked like a man inspecting a fence line. The engineer and fireman were scrambling out of the cab, coughing, blackened by soot but moving. They looked unhurt. "Stay on the ground," Shorty shouted. His voice was muffled by the flour sack, flat and hard. The engineer looked up. He saw the shotgun. He saw the mule standing on the ridge. He saw the grease on the tracks. "You greased the line," the engineer yelled, more incredulous than scared. "You crazy son of a bitch, you greased the line with lard." "Hog fat," Shorty corrected. "Walk away from the engine. It might blow." It wouldn't, but they didn't know that. They scrambled up the far bank, hands raised. Shorty walked past the hissing locomotive to the second car. The express car. The door was shut tight. "Open it up," Shorty yelled, racking the slide of the shotgun. Clack clack. "We're armed," a voice shouted from inside. "Federal mail. Back off." "I ain't here for the letters," Shorty said. "I'm here for the tax money. And I got dynamite." He didn't have dynamite. He had a stick of kindling, wrapped in brown paper that he'd stuck in his belt. But in the confusion of a derailment, panic did the seeing for them. "Don't light it," the voice screamed. "Open the door and throw out the strongbox. Or I blow the hinges and come in shooting." A pause. A whispered argument inside. Then the heavy sliding door rumbled open a foot. A gray metal strongbox was shoved out. It tumbled to the ground, landing in the mud. "That's it," the guard yelled. "Now get." Shorty looked at the box. It was padlocked. "Key," Shorty said. "Don't have it. Agent at the depot has it." Shorty leveled the shotgun at the padlock. He turned his head away and pulled the trigger. Boom. The lock shattered. The hasp twisted. Shorty kicked the lid open. Inside were canvas sacks. Dozens of them. Marked with bank seals and county stamps. Shorty slung his shotgun over his shoulder. He grabbed two of the sacks, the heavy ones, the ones that clinked. He left the mail. He left the paper currency. He wanted the silver. The silver was what the farmers had paid. "Tell Martin," Shorty shouted at the open door, "that the surcharge has been revoked." He backed away, dragging the sacks. He hauled them up the embankment to the mule. Barnaby looked at the sacks, unimpressed. Shorty tied them to the saddle horn. He swung up onto the mule. The passengers were looking out the windows of the rear cars now. Faces pressed against the glass. A man in a silk hat. A woman in a bonnet. They stared at the figure in the flour sack hood, sitting on a mule next to a derailed locomotive. Shorty touched the brim of his hat, or where the brim would be under the sack. "Sorry for the delay," Shorty called out. "Technical difficulties." He kicked Barnaby and rode into the woods. He rode for an hour, circling back through the deep hollows, crossing the creek 3 times to kill the scent. He stopped at a limestone cave he knew, hidden by a curtain of ivy. He opened the sacks. It was a fortune. $2,000, maybe more. Silver dollars, gold eagles, quarters. Shorty sat on a rock and looked at it. He could keep it. He could ride to Mexico. He could buy a ranch in Arizona and never see snow again. He thought about the Miller place down the road. They had 4 kids and a roof that leaked. He thought about Widow Henderson, who had sold her wedding ring to pay the levy. He thought about the look on Sarah's face when she packed the wagon. Shorty stood up. "It ain't mine," he said to the mule. "It's the valley's." He waited until nightfall. The moon was obscured by clouds. the darkness total. Shorty rode. He became a shadow in a valley of shadows. He stopped at the Miller farm first. The house was dark. Shorty crept up to the porch. He took a handful of silver dollars, 50 of them, and put them in a small burlap sack. He tied it to the doorknob. He scratched a note on a piece of bark with his charcoal. Refund. He rode to the Henderson place. He left gold eagles in the milk box. He rode to the O'Malley shanty. He left a stack of quarters on the windowsill. He rode all night. He distributed the harvest. He gave back what Boggs had squeezed out. He didn't give them charity. He gave them restitution. By dawn, the sacks were light. Shorty had kept $50 for himself, enough to buy supplies, shells, and feed for the mule. The rest was gone, returned to the pockets it came from. He rode back up to the high ridge, to the cave overlooking the valley. He could see the train from up there. They had a crane out, trying to lift the engine back onto the tracks. Men were swarming over it like ants. Sheriff Boggs was there waving his arms. Shorty pulled off the flour sack mask. He wiped the sweat from his face. He looked at the scene below. He had stopped the machine. He had made it slide in its own grease. "They'll be mad now, Barnaby," Shorty said. "Real mad." The mule chewed on a briar, indifferent to the wrath of empires. Shorty patted the shotgun. "Let 'em come," Shorty said. "We know the rocks. They just know the map." He lay down on the stone floor of the cave, pulling his coat tight. He was a wanted man. A train robber. An outlaw. But as he closed his eyes, he didn't feel like a criminal. Chapter 16. Sheriff Boggs didn't look like a hunter. He looked like a man trying to push a rope uphill. He was sweating through his duster, his face a map of red blotches, and his chestnut mare was blowing hard enough to rattle her bit. Behind him, 12 men rode single file up the deer trail. They weren't deputies. They were the track layers and camp guards Martin had hired for $10 a head. They carried shotguns, Winchesters, and pick handles, looking less like a posse and more like a lynch mob that had taken a wrong turn. "Track goes left," the man with the scar said. He was riding point, leaning over his saddle horn to study the ground. "Mule shoe. Deep impression. He's carrying weight." "He's carrying my money," Boggs grunted. "Keep moving." They turned left. The trail narrowed, squeezed between a limestone bluff and a drop-off that fell away into a tangle of briar and poison ivy. The ground was slick with thawing mud. Shorty Small watched them from 50 feet up. He was belly down on a ledge, invisible against the gray stone. He wasn't wearing the flour sack anymore. He needed his peripheral vision. He watched Boggs wipe his face. He watched the scarred man curse as his horse stumbled on a root. "Come on up," Shorty whispered. "The view is fine." He had spent the morning preparing the welcome mat. It wasn't complicated. Shorty didn't know about military tactics or flanking maneuvers. He knew about gravity. He knew that if you kicked a keystone out of a dry stack wall, the wall came down. And he knew that bald-faced hornets were dormant in the cold, but woke up angry if you shook their house. The posse reached the pinch point. The bluff rose sheer on their right. On their left, a dead oak tree leaned out over the trail, its roots half exposed by erosion. Hanging from a low branch, right at head height for a mounted man, was a gray paper nest the size of a water bucket. Shorty picked up a rock. It was the size of a baseball, heavy and jagged. He waited until the scarred man passed under the branch. He waited until Boggs was right underneath it. Shorty tossed the rock. It didn't hit the men. It hit the branch 3 feet above the nest. Thwack. The vibration traveled down the wood. The nest shuddered. A low hum started inside, like a distant dynamo spinning up. Then the second rock hit the nest directly. It punched a hole in the paper side. The hum turned into a buzzsaw. Black shapes poured out of the hole. They were groggy for a second, stunned by the cold air, but then they sensed the heat. The heat of the horses. The heat of the men. "What's that noise?" Boggs asked, looking up. The first hornet hit him on the cheekbone. It felt like a hot needle driven into the bone. "Ow." Boggs slapped his face. Then the cloud descended. The horses went crazy first. The scarred man's mount reared, twisting in the narrow space. The horse behind it panicked, crowding forward. Men shouted, slapping at the air, swatting their necks. "Hornets?" someone screamed. "Bees." "Run." There was nowhere to run. The trail was blocked front and back by panicked animals. Boggs' mare bucked, dropping her head and kicking out. Boggs lost his stirrups. He grabbed the mane, yelling, as another hornet stung him on the ear. Shorty watched the chaos. It was kinetic. It was loud. It was effective. He slid backward off the ledge, moving deeper into the rocks. He didn't stay to watch the finish. He had another appointment a mile east, at the scree slope. He scrambled up a chimney of rock, moving with the easy grace of a goat. He reached the top of the ridge and broke into a trot. Barnaby was tied in a thicket of cedar, ears swiveling as Shorty approached. "They're busy," Shorty told the mule. "Let's move the furniture." He led the mule to the top of Devil's Slide. It was a slope of loose shale that ran down to the creek bed. The posse would have to cross the bottom of it to circle back to the main road. Shorty checked the logs he had wedged behind a boulder at the crest. They were old fence posts, heavy oak rounds. They were holding back a pile of rocks he had gathered, fist-sized stones, slate shards, dirt clods. He waited 20 minutes. He heard them coming. They were loud now. No more tracking. They were crashing through the brush, cursing, arguing. "I'm telling you, we go back," a voice yelled. "My eye is swole shut." "Martin pays for the head," the scarred man roared. "You want the $10 or not?" "I want ice." They rode into the creek bed below. They looked ragged. Boggs' face was puffy on one side. The horses were skittish, eyes rolling white. They started to cross the creek. Shorty leaned his shoulder against the boulder. He pushed. The rock shifted. The logs rolled free. The pile gave way. It wasn't an avalanche that would bury them. Shorty didn't want to kill them. He wanted to break their spirit. He wanted to make the woods feel haunted. The rocks clattered down the slide. Clack, clack, clatter, crash. It sounded like the mountain was clearing its throat. Rock slide. The posse scattered. Horses splashed through the water, slipping on the mossy stones. Men dove from their saddles into the freezing creek. The debris hit the water with a series of heavy splashes, soaking them with icy spray. Dust billowed up. When it settled, the creek bed was empty of riders. They were scrambling up the far bank, dragging wet horses, shivering, miserable. "He's doing it!" Boggs screamed, pointing up at the ridge. "He's up there. I saw him." "Shoot him!" the scarred man yelled. He raised his Winchester and fired blindly at the tree line. Bang! Bang! The bullets clipped pine branches 50 feet below Shorty. Shorty didn't fire back. He just stepped out onto a flat rock where they could see him. He stood there for a second, a small figure in a heavy coat, looking down at them like a disappointment. He tipped his hat. Then he stepped back into the trees and vanished. Down in the creek, the posse fell apart. "I'm done," a track layer said, shivering violently. I ain't fighting ghosts and bugs for $10. You desert, you don't get paid. Boggs threatened. Keep it, the man said. He climbed onto his horse and turned back toward town. I'm going to get a drink. 2 more men followed him. Then 3 more. Boggs watched them go. He looked at the scarred man. There were only 4 of them left now. We go on, Boggs said, though his voice lacked conviction. He's playing with us, Sheriff, the scarred man said. He wiped water from his rifle. He knows this ground. We're just walking into his parlor. He's one man, Boggs insisted. He has to sleep. He has to eat. Does he? The scarred man asked. He looked at the empty ridge. Doesn't look like he's doing much of either. Looks like he's hunting. Shorty led Barnaby away from the edge. He patted the mule's neck. That thinned the herd, Shorty said. He checked the sun. It was dropping. The temperature would plummet tonight. He knew where Boggs would go next. There was an old trapper's cabin in the hollow, the only shelter for 5 miles. Boggs would want a roof. He would want a fire. Shorty smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had rigged the stovepipe in that cabin 3 years ago to smoke out raccoons. Let's go, Barnaby, Shorty said. We got 1 more lesson to teach before supper. Chapter 17. The 8 a.m. train from St. Louis usually carried mail, dry goods, and passengers looking to start over in the territories. Today, it carried a problem solver. Silas Martin stood on the platform of the Cotter's Junction Depot. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cold and smelling of wet iron. Beside him, Sheriff Boggs shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking like a schoolboy waiting for the headmaster's cane. His face was still swollen on one side where the hornet had stung him, closing his left eye to a slit. He's expensive, Boggs grumbled, spitting into the mud. I told you, Mr. Martin, I can handle small. I just need fresh horses and men who aren't afraid of bugs. You've had horses, men, and time, Martin said, not looking at him. You failed. Now I'm bringing in a professional. The train hissed to a halt. The steam cleared. A single passenger stepped down from the rear car. He didn't look like a cowboy. He didn't look like a lawman. He wore a charcoal wool suit that was cut tight, a bowler hat, and a long gray duster that was impeccably clean. He carried a leather valise in one hand and a rifle case in the other. He had a face that seemed to have been carved out of flint, sharp angles, pale skin, and eyes that were the color of dirty ice. He walked over to them. He didn't offer a hand. He just set the valise down on the dry planks of the platform. Mr. Martin, the man said. His voice was soft, devoid of inflection. I'm Graves. Mr. Graves, Martin said. Welcome to the mud. Graves looked at Boggs. He scanned the sheriff from his muddy boots to his swollen face. He didn't smile. He just catalogued the incompetence in a single glance. Sheriff, Graves said. This is Sheriff Boggs, Martin introduced. He's been leading the pursuit. Pursuit implies you know where the quarry is going, Graves said. From the look of the sheriff, it seems the quarry was doing the letting. Boggs bristled, his hand drifting toward his gun belt. Now listen here, mister. That farmer knows the rocks. He's got tricks. Tricks are for magicians, Graves said. Patterns are for fugitives. Is there a place we can talk that doesn't smell of creosote? They went to the telegraph office. Martin had tea. Boggs poured himself a whiskey from a bottle in the desk drawer. Graves drank nothing. He opened his valise and took out a map, spreading it over Martin's desk. Show me, Graves said. Boggs pointed a thick finger at the map. Here's the farm. Here's where he robbed the courier. Here's the train derailment. And here's where he dropped a rock slide on us. Graves studied the map. He traced the locations with a long, pale finger. He didn't look at the terrain as obstacles. He looked at it as a grid. He circles, Graves said. He runs, Boggs corrected. No, Graves said. A runner goes linear. A runner heads for the border or the big city. This man. Small, is it? Shorty Small, Martin said. Small stays within a 5-mile radius of his home, Graves said. He hits the courier here. He hits the train here. He hits the posse here. All points are equidistant from the farmhouse. He's protecting the property, Martin said. He thinks he still owns it. He's not protecting it, Graves said. He's using it. It's his supply depot. It's his anchor. A man like this, a farmer, you said? Dirt farmer, Boggs sneered. Stubborn as a mule. Farmers are creatures of habit, Graves said. They are tied to the soil. He isn't fleeing, gentlemen. He's hunting you on his own ground. And he's circling back to refuel. Graves tapped a spot on the map. The natural bridge, Graves said. What is this? Tourist trap, Boggs said. He built a scenic overlook. Tried to charge people to look at a rock. It's on the high ridge, overlooking the valley. It's a choke point, Graves corrected. High ground. Good visibility. And it connects the deep woods to the road leading to his farm. If he wants to get back to the house to check on things, or to retrieve something he buried, he has to cross that ridge. He won't go back to the house, Boggs argued. We gutted it. Took the furniture. Killed the dog. He'll go back, Graves said. Because it's the only place he feels like himself. And because he's arrogant. He thinks he's invisible. Graves folded the map. We stopped chasing him, Graves said. Chasing a man in his own backyard is suicide. We let him come to us. You want to wait at the farm? Martin asked. Too obvious, Graves said. He'll watch the farm from the tree line. If he sees horses, he vanishes. We wait at the bridge. The bridge. It's tactical, Graves explained, opening his rifle case. Inside lay a Sharps 1874 long-range rifle, the metal gleaming with oil. It was a sniper's weapon, capable of taking a man's head off at 1,000 yards. I can cover the approach from the north and the south. We set up in the rocks. We wait. When he crosses the span, I end the contract. You make it sound simple, Martin said. It is simple, Graves said. It's just geometry. Distance, windage, and a target that moves into the crosshairs. I'll get the boys, Boggs said, reaching for his hat. We'll ride out in force. No, Graves said. The word was a door slamming. No posse. No thundering hooves. Just me. And you, Sheriff, if you can be quiet. Me? Boggs asked. I need a spotter, Graves said. And I need someone to carry the shovel. We'll need to bury him where he falls. Mr. Martin wants this tidy, do you not? Extremely tidy, Martin said. No bodies on the tracks. No martyrs in town. Then we leave in 10 minutes, Graves said. We walk. We leave the horses here. The hike up to the natural bridge took 2 hours. Graves moved with a deceptive speed, his long legs eating up the ground. He didn't sweat. He didn't pant. He moved like a machine, calibrated for efficient travel. Boggs struggled. He wheezed, slipping on the wet rocks, cursing under his breath. Every time he snapped a twig, Graves would stop and look at him with those dead eyes until Boggs froze. They reached the high ridge in the late afternoon. The wind was howling up here, stripping the heat from the stone. The natural bridge stood silent and gray, arching over the chasm. The picnic tables Shorty had built were overturned, scattered by the wind or maybe by Boggs' men during the eviction. The sign, Scenic Overlook, was lying face down in the dirt. "It's deserted," Boggs whispered. "It's empty," Graves corrected. "There's a difference." Graves surveyed the area. He didn't walk out onto the bridge. He climbed a pile of boulders 50 yards back, a spot that offered a commanding view of the arch and the trails leading to it. He set up his position. He unfolded a heavy canvas mat to lie on. He placed a sandbag on the rock to rest the heavy octagonal barrel of the sharps. He took out a brass telescope and set it up on a small tripod. "You lay there," Graves said, pointing to a depression in the rocks to his left. "Watch the south trail. Use the glass." Boggs wedged himself into the crevice. It was cold and damp. "How long we waiting?" "Until he comes," Graves said. He lay down behind the rifle, adjusting the vernier sight. "What if he don't come?" "He will. It's getting dark. He needs shelter. He needs food. And this is the shortcut to his root cellar." Graves settled in. He became part of the rock. He didn't twitch. He didn't smoke. Boggs shivered. He watched the south trail through the telescope. The magnification made the woods jump out at him. Every swaying branch looked like a man. Every shadow looked like a mule. An hour passed. The sun began to dip toward the western peaks, painting the sky in blood and bruises. "You're a Pinkerton," Boggs said, trying to break the silence. "I heard you boys are rough." "We are effective," Graves said, his eye not leaving the sight. "You ever hunt a farmer before?" "I've hunted bank robbers, anarchists, and senators," Graves said. "Men are all the same, Sheriff. They all have a routine. They all have something they want to protect. And they all bleed when you put a .50 caliber slug through the thoracic cavity." "He's got a mule," Boggs said. "Watch for the mule." "I'm watching for the motion," Graves said. "The mule is just transport." Another hour. The light was fading fast now. The shadows in the chasm were lengthening, turning into pools of ink. "Movement," Graves whispered. Boggs jerked the telescope. "Where?" "North trail. Coming out of the scrub." Boggs swept the glass. He saw it. A shape moving through the trees. Gray on gray. It was the mule. Barnaby stepped out of the tree line, his head bobbing. He looked tired. He was walking slow, picking his way over the rocks. On his back sat a figure. He was wrapped in a heavy coat, a flour sack hood pulled over his head. The shotgun was resting across the saddle horn. "That's him," Boggs hissed. "That's the bastard." "Range 400 yards, Graves said calmly. He adjusted the sight, clicking the wheel. "Wind is cross-left, 5 miles an hour." "Take him," Boggs urged. "Shoot him now." "Wait," Graves said. "Let him get on the bridge. No cover on the bridge. And if he falls, he goes into the gorge. Saves us the digging." Shorty rode toward the bridge. He stopped at the edge. He seemed to be looking around, checking the wind, checking the light. The flour sack mask turned left, then right. "He's suspicious," Boggs said. "He smells us." "He smells nothing," Graves said. "He's just cautious." But caution doesn't stop a bullet that travels faster than sound. Shorty nudged the mule. Barnaby stepped onto the limestone arch. The hooves clattered hollowly on the stone. Graves exhaled slowly. He took up the slack in the trigger. "Center mass," Graves whispered to himself. The mule walked to the middle of the bridge. Shorty sat there, exposed, a perfect silhouette against the dying light. "Do it," Boggs breathed. Graves squeezed the trigger. Boom. The sharps roared, a massive concussion that kicked up dust around the muzzle. A cloud of white smoke obscured the view for a split second. Boggs watched through the telescope. He saw the bullet hit. He saw the coat puff out in the back. The figure on the mule jerked violently, flailing arms, and toppled sideways out of the saddle. The body hit the stone railing Shorty had built, smashed through the wood, and plummeted into the darkness of the chasm. The mule bolted, galloping across the bridge and disappearing into the woods on the far side. "Got him," Boggs shouted, scrambling up. "By God, you nailed him. Dropped him like a sack of potatoes." Graves sat up. He ejected the spent brass casing. It pinged against the rock. He didn't look excited. He looked thoughtful. "Solid hit," Graves said. "Why didn't the mule shy?" "What?" Boggs asked, dancing a little jig. "Who cares? He's gone. He's at the bottom of the hole. We won." "The mule," Graves said, standing up and brushing the dust off his duster. "A gun shot right over its ear. It should have bucked. It should have thrown him before the bullet hit. It just ran." "Maybe it's deaf," Boggs said. "Come on. We got to go down there and verify. Martin wants the shotgun." Graves frowned. He packed the rifle back into its case. He picked up the valise. "Let's go look at the body," Graves said. "But something feels light." They climbed down from the rocks and walked to the bridge. The wind was whipping through the gorge now, howling like a banshee. They reached the broken railing. Splintered oak hung over the abyss. Boggs peered over the edge. It was pitch black down there. The roar of the creek masked any sound. "Long drop," Boggs said. "Ain't nobody surviving that." "We need to find the body," Graves said. "We need the proof." "We can climb down the south face," Boggs said. "There's a goat path. Takes about 20 minutes. "Lead the way," Graves said. They navigated the treacherous path down into the gorge. It was slick with spray from the creek. They used a lantern Graves had brought in his pack. They reached the bottom. The creek was churning white froth around the boulders. "Over here," Boggs called out. He was shining the light near a large flat rock at the water's edge. There was a pile of wet wool. A coat. Graves walked over. He nudged it with his boot. It was Shorty's coat. It was torn, soaked, and there was a hole in the back where the bullet had exited. "See," Boggs said. "Dead as a doornail." Graves knelt down. He pulled the flour sack hood off the head. Underneath wasn't a face. It was a pumpkin. A large orange field pumpkin, shattered by the fall, leaking seeds and pulp. The body of the coat was stuffed with straw and dead grass. Sticks for arms. "A scarecrow," Graves whispered. The icy calm in his voice cracked, revealing a jagged edge of fury. "What?" Boggs stared at the pumpkin. "But I saw him ride. I saw him move his head." "You saw the wind move a sack," Graves hissed. He stood up, looking at the dark cliffs towering above them. He tied a dummy to the mule. He sent the mule across to draw fire. "Then where is he?" Boggs asked, looking around wildly. From high above, from the top of the ridge they had just left, a sound drifted down. Clack, clack. The sound of a shotgun racking a slide. Then a voice, amplified by the acoustics of the canyon. "You boys enjoy the walk back up," Shorty's voice called out. "I'm borrowing the horses." Graves looked up. He couldn't see anything but the black rim of the canyon. But he knew. Shorty had been watching them watch the dummy. He had let them take the shot, let them climb down into the hole, and now. "My horse," Boggs yelled. "My mare is up there." "He's taking our mounts," Graves said. "And he's leaving us in the bottom of a gorge, in the middle of the night." "We're trapped," Boggs whimpered. Graves looked at the shattered pumpkin. He looked at the straw floating in the creek. He smiled. It was a terrible, thin smile. "He's good," Graves said. "He's very good." He picked up his rifle case. "Start climbing, Sheriff." The game just got interesting. Chapter 18. The climb out of the gorge took an hour of fingernail-tearing, knee-scraping misery. Sheriff Boggs reached the rim first, hauled up by Graves, who seemed to possess the strength of a mechanical winch. Boggs flopped onto the frozen grass, gasping like a landed catfish, his chest heaving against the cold mud. Graves didn't flop. He stood up, brushed the limestone dust from his knees, and checked the action of his Sharps rifle. He was breathing hard, but his hands were steady. He looked at the moon, which was finally breaking through the clouds, casting long, skeletal shadows across the ridge. "He's close," Graves said. "He's gone," Boggs wheezed, sitting up and wiping slime from his face. "He took the horses. He's halfway to the state line." "No," Graves said. "He didn't take the horses to ride them. He took them to deny us mobility. He's still here." Graves pointed down the slope toward the ruins of the farm. "He needs the root cellar," Graves said. "You said he hid money. A man who hides money also hides powder and lead. He wasted shells on the train. He's running light." Boggs looked down at the dark shape of the farmhouse chimney, standing like a tombstone in the valley. "The cellar is by the barn." "Then we wait," Graves said. "He thinks we're trapped in the hole. He thinks he has time." They moved through the tree line, skirting the open ground of the scenic overlook. The wind was biting, carrying the smell of old snow and wet pine. Graves moved like a ghost, his long duster flowing silent around his legs. Boggs stumbled, cursing under his breath, his boots heavy with mud. They reached the outcropping of rock overlooking the barn ruins. Graves set up his position again. He didn't use the tripod this time. He rested the rifle on a mossy log. "There," Graves whispered. Boggs squinted. Down in the yard, near the charred remains of the toolshed, a shadow moved. It wasn't a mule. It was a man. Shorty Small was digging. He had cleared away a pile of debris and was pulling up a trapdoor. He moved efficiently, hauling out a heavy wooden crate. He wasn't rushing. He was methodical, a farmer bringing in the harvest. "He's got the horses tied in the trees," Graves noted, scanning the periphery. "Smart. Ready for a quick exit." "Shoot him," Boggs hissed. "Range is 200 yards. You can hit a button at that distance." "I can," Graves said. "But the angle is bad. He's behind the stone foundation. If I miss the head, he drops into the cellar and we have a standoff. Then we go down there." "We flush him," Graves said. "You go left. Circle behind the co-op. I'll cover the cellar door. When he pops up to look at you, I end it." Boggs swallowed hard. "Me? Go down there? He's got a shotgun, Graves. At close range, that's a meat grinder." Graves turned his head. His eyes were flat, dead things in the moonlight. "You wanted to catch him, Sheriff. Go catch him. Or, I can mention in my report to Martin that you refuse to engage the enemy." Boggs glared at him, but the fear of Martin and the cold menace of the Pinkerton was stronger than his fear of Shorty. He drew his revolver. "I'll flush him," Boggs spat. "But you better not miss." Boggs slid down the embankment, moving as quietly as a man of his bulk could. He worked his way through the brush, circling wide. Shorty hauled a second box out of the cellar. He set it on the ground. He stood up and stretched his back. He looked toward the ridge, toward the bridge. He stood still for a long moment, listening. Graves centered the crosshairs on Shorty's chest. The wind was gusting. It was a tricky shot. Down in the brush, Boggs stepped on a dry branch. Crack. Shorty dropped. He didn't look, he just vanished. He fell flat behind the stone foundation wall of the barn. Graves cursed softly. He held his fire. "Who's there?" Shorty's voice rang out, echoing off the remaining walls. "Sheriff Boggs." Boggs yelled from behind the chicken coop. "Come out, Shorty. We got you boxed." "You climbed out," Shorty yelled back. "Didn't think you had the wind for it." "I got wind enough to hang you," Boggs shouted. He fired a shot into the foundation stones. Sparks flew. Shorty returned fire instantly. The shotgun roared, a flash of orange flame in the dark. Buckshot shredded the corner of the coop, sending splinters raining down on Boggs. "Damn it!" Boggs screamed, ducking low. "Graves, take the shot." "Show yourself, Shorty," Graves yelled from the ridge. "Give me a target." "Pinkerton," Shorty called. "You missed the pumpkin. You want to try for the real thing?" Shorty popped up, fired the second barrel at the ridge, and ducked back down before Graves could squeeze the trigger. The buckshot fell short, rattling harmlessly in the leaves, but it spoiled Graves' aim. "He's pinned," Graves muttered. He reloaded the sharps. "But he's dug in." "Do something," Boggs yelled. "He's reloading." "Keep him down," Graves ordered. Boggs fired 2 more shots, wild and desperate. Shorty didn't answer. He was moving. Graves saw the shadow shift along the length of the foundation wall. He was heading for the horses. "He's making a break for the trees," Graves shouted. "Cut him off, Sheriff." Boggs looked at the open ground between the coop and the trees. It was 30 yards of nothing. "I ain't going out there," Boggs yelled. "He'll cut me in half." "Move," Graves commanded. "Drive him back." "No," Boggs shouted. He turned and started to crawl backward, away from the fight, heading for the safety of the deep woods. "I'm done. I'm getting the posse." Graves watched the sheriff retreat. He watched Shorty break cover, sprinting for the trees where the horses were tied. Graves had a choice. He could try to hit the running man in the dark, a low percentage shot with the wind howling. Or he could solve the immediate problem of a witness who would blame the failure on the Pinkerton agency. Graves shifted his aim. He tracked Boggs, scrambling up the bank. The sheriff was a large, slow target. "Cowardice," Graves whispered. He squeezed the trigger. Boom. The heavy slug hit Boggs between the shoulder blades. The sheriff pitched forward, face first into the mud, and slid halfway back down the slope. He didn't twitch. The gunshot echoed, rolling through the valley. Shorty reached the trees. He untied one of the horses, Boggs' mare. He swung up into the saddle. Graves racked the lever, ejecting the casing. He loaded another round. He swung the rifle back toward the trees. But Shorty was gone. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the night, heading toward the railhead. Graves stood up. He looked down at the body of the sheriff. "Collateral damage," Graves said. He picked up his valise. He walked down the slope to the yard. He checked the boxes Shorty had pulled from the cellar. One was full of canned peaches. The other was ammunition, paper shells for the shotgun. Shorty had taken what he could carry in his pockets, but he had left the bulk of it. He was running light again. Graves walked over to Boggs. He rolled the body over with his boot. The sheriff's eyes were open, staring up at the natural bridge looming overhead. Graves reached down and took the badge off Boggs' duster. He put it in his pocket. "Resisting arrest," Graves said, rehearsing the line for Martin. "Tragic crossfire." He looked at the tracks leading out of the yard. Shorty was heading for the tracks. He was heading for the siege. Graves smiled. The game wasn't over. It had just moved to the final board. He walked to the remaining horse, Graves' own mount, which Shorty had left tied further back. Shorty hadn't taken it. He had left it. A message. "Come and get me." Graves mounted up. He checked the sharps. "I'm coming," Graves said to the darkness. He turned the horse and rode toward the railroad, leaving the dead sheriff to guard the ruins of a farm he had stolen but couldn't keep. Chapter 19. The farmhouse was empty, stripped to the studs by the posse days ago, but it still held the memory of warmth. It smelled of Sarah's soap and the pine resin in the walls. Shorty Small sat on the floor beneath the front window, his back against the logs. He struck a match on his thumbnail and looked at his left hip. The denim of his overalls was dark and stiff. A ricochet from the barn fight, a piece of lead or maybe a jagged stone chip, had gouged a line through the flesh just above the belt. He hadn't felt it riding the mare back up the ridge. He hadn't felt it digging the traps in the frozen yard. But now, with the adrenaline fading into a dull, rhythmic throb, he felt it. He blew out the match. Darkness rushed back in, heavy and cold. "Just a scratch," Shorty whispered to the empty room. "Leak fix." He took a strip of cloth he'd torn from an old curtain left in the corner and bound it tight around his waist. He pulled the knot hard, grunting as the pressure bit into the wound. He checked the shotgun. He had 12 shells left in his pockets. 2 in the gun. 14 chances. He checked the view through the slat in the shutter. The valley floor was lit up. Not by the moon, but by the headlight of the locomotive idling at the water tower. It cast a long, conical beam of electric light up the slope, cutting through the trees, searching. Shadows danced in the glare, long distorted shapes of men moving up the trail. They were coming. It wasn't a posse this time. It was an eviction crew. Silas Martin didn't ride a horse. He walked up the wagon road surrounded by a phalanx of men in heavy coats carrying Winchester rifles. Graves walked beside him, silent, carrying his sharps case like a doctor making a house call. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, just outside the range of a shotgun. The electric light from the train below didn't reach this high, so they had lit torches. The flames sputtered in the wind, illuminating Martin's sharp features. "Mr. Small," Martin called out. His voice was calm, cultivated, the voice of a man who bought mountains. "This has gone far enough. You've killed a sheriff. You've robbed a federal transport. There is no way out of this valley." Shorty didn't answer. He moved to the side of the window, keeping his profile clear of the opening. "We know you're in there," Martin continued. Graves tracked the horse. "We found the animal by the creek. You're cornered, sir." Shorty picked up a piece of charcoal from the cold fireplace. He threw it against the far wall. Click. "He's in there," Graves said from the yard. "He's shifting position." "Small," Martin shouted. "I have 20 men. Authorized deputies of the territory. We can turn this house into splinters in 10 minutes. Come out, hand over the receipt you stole, and you will be treated fairly." "Fairly," Shorty muttered. "Like the dog." He stayed silent. Silence was a weapon. It made them nervous. It made them wonder if he was aiming. "Very well," Martin said. He sounded bored. "Mr. Graves, clear the property." "Spread out," Graves ordered. "Flank the house. Watch for the mule. Watch the windows." The men moved. They fanned out, stepping off the hard-packed wagon road into the field where Shorty used to grow corn. The ground was frozen, covered in a skiff of snow. Shorty watched them come. He counted. 6 on the left. 6 on the right. 4 coming up the middle. "Come on," Shorty whispered. "Step lively." The man on the far left, a big man in a checkered mackinaw, took a step forward. He was walking through the patch of ground where Shorty had pulled the limestone rocks years ago. He stepped on a pile of brush. It wasn't brush. It was a camouflage cover for a post hole Shorty had dug 3 days ago and never filled. The man's leg went down. He yelled, pitching forward. As he fell, his shin hit the edge of the frozen earth. Snap. Help. My leg. The man next to him turned to help. He tripped a line of twine strung ankle-high between 2 stumps. He went down face first, his rifle discharging into the dirt. Bang. Contact, someone screamed. He's shooting. The line erupted. 20 rifles opened up on the farmhouse. The walls shook. Bullets hammered the logs, punching through the chinking, shattering the remaining glass in the window frames. Wood splinters sprayed the room like shrapnel. Shorty stayed low, pressed to the floorboards. The air above him filled with lead wasps buzzing across the room. He waited for the reload. The volley tapered off. Shorty popped up at the window. He saw a muzzle flash near the woodpile. He aimed the right barrel. Boom. The man by the woodpile yelled and dropped his rifle, clutching his shoulder. Shorty ducked back down as a fresh wave of fire chewed up the windowsill. Hold fire. Graves' voice cut through the noise. He's baiting you. Stop shooting the wood. The shooting stopped. The silence rushed back, ringing. He's got the yard mined, Graves shouted. Watch your step. Eyes on the ground. Burn it, Martin said. He was standing back by the gate, safe behind a tree. I'm tired of this game. Burn the house. We need the body, Graves said. We need the paper. I don't care about the paper anymore, Martin snapped. If it burns, it burns. Torch it. 3 men lit fresh torches. They moved forward, wary of the ground, heading for the porch. Shorty crawled to the back room. He went to the kitchen window. He saw them coming around the side. He picked up a jar from the floor. It was a mason jar filled with lamp oil and a rag stuffed in the top. He lit the rag with a match. He threw the jar out the window. It smashed against the frozen ground right in front of the advancing men. The oil splashed and ignited. A wall of fire jumped up, separating them from the house. The men scrambled back, cursing. He's throwing fire. Flank him. Shorty ran back to the front room. He reloaded the empty chamber. He was moving fast, ignoring the pain in his hip. He wasn't defending a house. The house was dead. He was defending the idea that a man couldn't just be pushed off the map because a rich man wanted a view. Graves. Shorty yelled. I'm here, Shorty, Graves answered from the darkness. He sounded close. Too close. You bring a shovel? Shorty asked. I brought 2, Graves said. Good. You can bury your boss. Shorty fired at a shadow moving near the gate. The shadow didn't drop, but it danced back. Martin was losing patience. Graves. End this. I'm freezing out here. He's good, Graves said. He's using the interior lines. Moving window to window. I don't pay you to admire him. I pay you to kill him. Then give me covering fire, Graves said. The rifles opened up again. A constant, deafening roar. They were shredding the house. The door hung by one hinge. The roof was taking hits, shingles flying. Shorty huddled in the corner. He couldn't shoot back. If he stood up, he was dead. He looked at the floorboard under the bed frame. The box was empty. The money was gone, given back to the neighbors. He had nothing left but the gun and the grit. Then he smelled it. Smoke. Not gun smoke. Wood smoke. They had managed to toss a torch onto the back porch roof. The dry shingles, untreated pine, caught fast. He heard the crackle above him. "Fire!" a man shouted. "Roof's caught." "Let it burn," Martin yelled. "Flush him out." The heat began to build. The smoke curled down from the ceiling, thick and gray. Shorty coughed, pulling the collar of his coat up over his mouth. He looked at the door. If he ran out the front, 20 rifles were waiting. If he stayed, he cooked. He looked at the floor. The root cellar. The trapdoor was in the kitchen, under the rug Sarah used to stand on while she washed dishes. Shorty crawled to the kitchen. The ceiling was already glowing orange in spots. Embers drifted down like snow. He pulled the rug aside. He lifted the iron ring of the trapdoor. He dropped into the hole. It was a small space, smelling of onions and damp earth. It extended under the foundation. There was a vent pipe that came out near the back of the house, hidden in the hydrangeas Sarah had planted. It wasn't big enough for a man, but the drainage ditch. Shorty felt along the wall. The drainage tile. He had put it in 5 years ago to keep the cellar dry. It was a clay pipe, 18 inches wide, leading out to the ravine behind the house. He was small. Shorty Small. He pushed the shotgun into the pipe first. Then he squeezed his head and shoulders in. It was tight. Claustrophobic. He had to exhale to get his chest through. Above him, the house groaned. The roof beams were giving way. He crawled. He dragged himself by his elbows, inch by muddy inch. The darkness was absolute. The air was thin. He could hear the fire roaring above him now, a sound like a freight train. "He's done," Martin's voice muffled by the earth. "The roof is collapsing." "Hold fire," Graves said. "Wait for him to run." Shorty didn't run. He crawled. He scraped his injured hip on the clay, biting his lip to keep from screaming. He reached the end of the pipe. It opened into the ravine, overgrown with brambles. He pushed the shotgun out. He pulled himself free, tumbling into the snow and dead leaves. He lay there for a second, gasping the cold air. He looked up. The farmhouse was a pyre. Flames shot 30 feet into the air, lighting up the night. The roof collapsed with a massive crash, sending a fountain of sparks into the sky. On the other side of the house, in the front yard, the men were cheering. "Got him. Roasted him." Shorty stood up. He was covered in mud, soot, and blood. He looked like something dug out of a grave. He checked the shotgun. The barrels were clogged with mud. Useless. He dropped it. He reached into his boot. He pulled out the skinning knife he used for hogs. It had a 6-inch blade, honed to a razor edge. He climbed the bank of the ravine. He moved through the smoke, circling the fire. He saw them. They were standing in a semicircle around the burning house, mesmerized by the flames. The heat was intense, forcing them back. Martin was standing closest to the gate, warming his hands. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man who had closed a difficult deal. "A tragic accident," Martin said to Graves. "Faulty stovepipe. Farmer trapped inside." "We need the body," Graves said, staring into the inferno. "We have ashes," Martin said. "That's enough." Shorty moved. He didn't scream. He didn't announce himself. He stepped out of the smoke, directly behind Martin. Graves saw him first. The Pinkerton's eyes widened. He reached for his revolver. "Don't," Shorty rasped. Shorty grabbed Martin by the collar of his expensive wool coat. He jammed the knife blade against the man's throat, right under the jawline. "Nobody moves," Shorty said. Martin froze. He felt the cold steel. He smelled the smoke and the unwashed, desperate scent of the man holding him. "You're dead," Martin whispered. Not yet, Shorty said. Drop the guns. All of you. The hired guns looked at Graves. Graves looked at Shorty. He saw the eyes of a man who had crawled through a drainpipe to get to this moment. Drop them, Graves ordered. Rifles clattered to the frozen ground. Shorty pulled Martin backward, away from the fire, away from the heat. You burned my house, Shorty said. It was necessary, Martin stammered. Progress. This ain't progress, Shorty said. This is foreclosure. He turned Martin around so he could see the burning ruin. Look at it, Shorty ordered. That was a home. Built with these hands. I can pay you, Martin said. I can write a check. $10,000. You can go anywhere. I ain't going anywhere, Shorty said. And neither are you. Shorty looked at the telegraph wires running along the road, the wires that connected the depot to the world. We're going for a walk, Mr. Martin. To the station. What for? You like writing things, Shorty said. You wrote the tax law. You wrote the eviction notice. Now you're going to write a confession. I won't, Martin said, finding a shred of arrogance. You can't make me. Shorty pressed the knife. A bead of blood appeared on Martin's neck. I ain't a farmer no more, Shorty whispered. I'm the tax collector. And the bill is due. He shoved Martin toward the road. Walk. Martin walked. Graves watched them go, his hand hovering over his gun but never drawing. He watched the small, muddy man march the most powerful man in the territory down the road into the darkness. Chapter 20. The walk to the depot was a mile of freezing mud and silence. Shorty Small walked a half-step behind Silas Martin, the skinning knife pressed against the collar of the Baron's wool coat. They didn't look like men. They looked like a single, four-legged shadow moving under the electric light of the station platform. Behind them, the fire on the ridge was a dull orange glow against the clouds. The posse hadn't followed. Graves had likely done the math and realized that a dead boss meant no paycheck, while a hostage situation required patience. They stepped onto the platform. The wood was slick with ice. Martin slipped, his expensive leather soles finding no purchase. Shorty held him up by the coat. Steady, Shorty rasped. You trip, I slip. I slip, the knife goes deep. You're making a mistake, Martin said. His voice was brittle, the smooth polish cracked by the cold and the fear. You think a confession matters? I own the papers, Small. I own the wires. You own the track, Shorty said. You don't own the truth. Shorty kicked the door to the telegraph office open. The heat from the stove hit them, smelling of coal dust and stale coffee. The operator, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a green visor, jumped up from his desk. He knocked over his chair. Don't shoot, the operator yelled. Sit down, Shorty ordered. Hand on the key. Channel open to St. Louis. The operator looked at Martin. He saw the knife. He saw Shorty's face, soot-stained, bloody, eyes like burning coal. He sat down. Do it, Martin said. Do what he says. The operator tapped the key. Click, clack, click. The sound was loud in the small room. Channel open, the operator whispered. St. Louis Post-Dispatch wire desk. Shorty pushed Martin toward the desk. Dictate, Shorty said. What? Martin asked. You know the words, Shorty said. The tax fraud. The fake levies. The jail that ain't a jail. Tell 'em how you squeezed the valley to pay for your re-election fund in Washington. Martin hesitated. He looked at the window. He was hoping for Graves. He was hoping for a miracle. Shorty pressed the knife tip into the soft flesh under Martin's ear. Start talking, Shorty said. Or I open you up right here and send the message myself in red ink." Martin closed his eyes. He took a breath. He began to speak. "To the editor," Martin said, his voice shaking. "I, Silas Martin, chairman of the Trans-Territory Line." The operator typed. Click, 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 click. "Hereby admit to the systematic extortion of the residents of Cotter's Valley. The improvement tax, the commerce fees, and the entertainment levy were fabricated instruments." "Keep going," Shorty hissed. "Tell 'em about the congressman." "Fabricated with the knowledge and cooperation of Congressman Thaddeus Leach," Martin continued, the words tasting like bile. "Funds collected were diverted to private accounts for political campaigning. No public works were planned. No jail was commissioned." "And the evictions," Shorty added. "The evictions were illegal seizures based on fraudulent debt," Martin said. He slumped against the desk. "I ordered the destruction of the small property to silence a witness." "Sign it," Shorty said. "Signed, Silas Martin." The operator finished typing. The key went silent. "Send it," Shorty said. "And wait for the acknowledgement." A moment later, the receiver clattered. "Message received. Confirm source." "Confirm it," Shorty said to Martin. "It's me," Martin whispered. "Martin." The operator tapped it out. Shorty pulled the knife back. He stepped away from the desk. "It's done," Shorty said. Martin turned around. He looked older. The arrogance that had held his spine straight was gone, drained away by the tapping of the brass key. "You ruined me," Martin said. "The scandal, the investigation. I'll lose the railroad. I'll lose the seat." "You lost the valley a long time ago," Shorty said. "You just didn't notice." Shorty backed toward the door. He looked at the operator. "You keep that tape," Shorty said. "You lose it, I come back." "I kept it," the operator nodded, clutching the paper strip. Shorty opened the door. The cold wind rushed in. "Where will you go?" Martin asked. "There's nowhere left. The law will still hunt you. Graves will still hunt you." "Let 'em hunt," Shorty said. "I know the rocks." He stepped out into the night. He didn't run. He walked past the water tower, past the sign that still lay face down in the mud. He walked to the edge of the woods where the darkness was absolute. He vanished. The end.